Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Lonely Issei Got Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Ria sighed as she and her peerage stepped through a magical circle back to the clubroom. She sat on the couch and reflected on the exhausting 2 weeks she had just endured, returning home to the underworld to argue against the arranged marriage with Riser Phoenix. The thought of him still angered her, but her family had insisted it was for the good of the family and for the life of devils. She had managed to convince her brother that she should not marry Riser, but persuading her parents and grandparents had been far more difficult. After 2 long weeks of debates, arguments, and compromises, she was finally back and ready to rest. Akino Himejima, her queen and oldest, most trusted friend, offered to prepare a bath for Rias. Rias gratefully accepted and remarked that talking with her family had drained all her energy. Kiba Yudo, her knight, asked if there was anything else for them to do. Rias told him that he and Kaneko could go home since it was getting late. Yuto nodded politely and left. Kaneko to her rook, said goodnight in an emotionless voice and also went on her way. Akino announced that the bath was ready. Rias prepared for it, set her clothes aside, and stepped into the warm water to relax. As she let the heat soothe her, she considered how to prevent the marriage to Riser Phoenix. She thought she might challenge Riser to a rating game. A victory could show her family she was capable of making her own decisions. First, however, she needed to strengthen her peerage. She loved them dearly and would not trade them for the world, but if she pursued her plan she would need everyone at their best. As Rias considered candidates who could help secure a win, one person in particular stood out, someone she had been watching for quite some time. Hyoudou Issei yawned wildly as he stumbled sleepily toward the school, nearly colliding with a trash can. He glared at the metal bin as if it had personally offended him. Today just was not his day. The previous night had run much later than he expected. His errand finished at 3 in the morning and he discovered he had left his keys inside his room, locking himself out of his own house. After a failed attempt to slip back in, his parents discovered him and demanded an explanation. Unable to answer, he spent the night without dinner and had to clean the entire house. When he finally collapsed onto his bed, exhausted, his alarm clock woke him up again. He considered skipping school until his father ripped the sheets off and dragged him out of bed. When Issei moved too slowly, his father tossed him into an ice-cold bath. He dressed in record time, skipped breakfast, and ran out the door. Now he was walking to school with his 2 friends. Issei greeted Matsuda and Motohama and asked how they were. The 2 turned and grinned back at him. Matsuda, a bald former jock who had joined the photography club, boasted about the many attractive students at Kuo Academy. Motohama, a short boy with glasses who liked to comment on appearances, praised the uniforms and their effect on the school's atmosphere. Issei listened and finally understood, nodding. He described the girl's uniform as a white long-sleeved button-down shirt with vertical pinstripes, a black ribbon at the collar, a black shoulder cape with a buttoned corset, and a magenta skirt with white accents. He admired the design. The boy's uniform consisted of a black blazer with white accents over a white button-down shirt, a black ribbon at the collar, black pants, and brown dress shoes. A summer variation used short sleeves and omitted the blazer or shoulder cape. Issei said they should appreciate what Kuo Academy represented. Matsuda and Motohama grew misty-eyed at the sentiment and jokingly imagined becoming popular. Their light-hearted boasting drew sharp disapproval from some of the girls at the school gates. The girls scolded them, calling them perverts and condemning their behavior, and the 3 friends felt their hopes collapse. Matsuda and Motohama complained that they were unpopular and that women disliked them. Issei refused to let them give up and urged his friends not to lose hope and to keep trying to improve themselves. The 3, encouraged by a few other boys nearby, cheered quietly among themselves. The girls at the gate shouted for them to go away and denounced their conduct, and the friends, embarrassed and chastened, were reduced to tears. Rias moved her pawn, effectively ending the game. Akino noted that it had been one of the harder ones, and Rias told her to make it harder next time. Rias then excused herself to take a shower and to think about her plans for the future, specifically how to resist her arranged marriage and perhaps challenge Riser for her freedom. She knew she would need more allies to stand a chance and wondered if any new students with potential had transferred to the prestigious school during the new term. Issei sneezed. Matsuda arrived excited and announced that Motohama had found a peephole in the kendo club room. The boys briefly looked through it. The details of what they saw are omitted. Issei was distracted by his imagination when Matsuda and Motohama argued over who had the right to use the discovery. The argument grew louder and drew attention from the club room. The kendo club members burst out, glaring at the boys with a fierce, disciplined intensity. They accused Issei of inappropriate behavior and threatened him with their shurnai. The confrontation turned into a swift, non-graphic, anime-style reprimand. The girls used their wooden swords to force the intruders away and teach them a hard lesson. Issei ended up bruised and embarrassed, sobbing in despair as he sat alone afterward. Issei later leaned against the railing of a bridge at sunset, thinking about his misfortune. He reflected that getting caught and punished was humiliating, even if he still felt conflicted about what had happened. His inner partner, Drake, scolded him for acting carelessly and pointed out that someone was approaching. A girl with long black hair and violet eyes walked up to him. She wore a school uniform he did not recognize and introduced herself shyly as Yuma Amano. She asked if he had a girlfriend, and when he said he did not, she nervously asked him to go out with her. Issei reacted with stunned joy and quickly agreed. They exchanged contact information, and she waved and walked away. After she left, Issei celebrated loudly. Drake warned him to remember who she might be, but Issei brushed the concern aside, focused on the fact that she had asked him out. As he walked home with a happy laugh, his senses remained aware of a short, white-haired devil who had been observing him and his exchange with the girl since he left school. Drake warned Issei that there was a strong chance his date intended to kill him. Issei told Drake to be quiet and insisted that this was his first date and he would impress her enough that she could not kill him. Drake observed that Issei sounded very confident that she would kill him. Issei told Drake to shut up. The morning after his meeting with Yuma and Issei walked to school together, surprising Matsuda and Motohama, who still refused to acknowledge that the two were a couple. Drake was conspicuously absent the whole day. When the two were left alone, Yuma had asked Issei on a date for that Saturday, which happened to be today. Issei thought that even if she was going to try to kill him, he would not let her. It would be terrible to die on his first date. He liked his life too much to give it up. Finally dressed in a black polo, a gray jacket, black pants, and new dress shoes he had bought for the occasion, Issei announced to his parents that he was leaving and headed out. Because of his excitement, he arrived at the meeting point an hour early and took the time to relax and watch the area. Issei asked Drake for a status check. Drake reported no traps and no ambushes, no unusual mana in the air, then detected a single energy signature heading their way. A young woman in a devil costume approached and handed Issei a devil summoning circle. Issei examined it, slipped it into his pocket, and thought that devils used these circles to reach humans and form contracts. It might come in handy. Yuma ran up wearing a pink top, a skirt, and a small bag. Yuma asked if Issei had been waiting long. Issei replied that he had only just arrived and felt a surge of joy. Their date began. They went window shopping at the mall, ate at a family restaurant, and Issei bought Yuma a small bracelet. As dusk fell, Yuma asked to go back to the park to show him something. Issei agreed, trying to hide his grin and thinking this would be the perfect end to the date. At the fountain, Yuma asked Issei for a favor, and Issei smiled but tensed slightly at the faint killing intent he now felt from her. Yuma then asked if he would die for her. In an instant, her appearance changed. Her clothes became dark, battle-ready armor and black wings erupted from her back, giving her the unmistakable appearance of a fallen angel. She summoned a spear of light and prepared to throw it at Issei, but Issei had already disappeared. The fallen angel shouted in anger and disbelief as she looked around, unable to find him. Rainier, who had been using Yuma's body, muttered that this was terrible luck for a first date. The spear struck the ground harmlessly behind where Issei had been. Rainier demanded to know what he was, convinced a normal human could not have disappeared and dodged so quickly. Issei told her that he was just a normal human. Rainier snarled that this was impossible and prepared another spear of light while accusing the god who had given him the sacred gear. Rainier charged with the intention to run him through. Issei moved with quick, controlled motions, evading the attack and using a swift restraining maneuver to disarm and pin her to the pavement. She struggled, but Issei held her down with strength that did not seem human. Issei asked Draig what to do. Draig suggested erasing her memory to avoid suspicion. Issei worried that if she were questioned by her superiors it would not be enough. Draig then offered an alternative, altering her memories instead, which would be simpler and carry less risk. Issei agreed that altering her memories could work. Unaware of the private discussion, Rainier continued to struggle and shouted in frustration. Issei told Yuma that he did not mean it personally, but she had tried to kill him and he had to do something to prevent her from alerting others. He commented that explaining it was pointless since she would forget it anyway. Rainier's vision went dark. Several hours later, when she regained consciousness, her memories of that day had been heavily altered. Meanwhile, at the Occult Research Club, a tense atmosphere hung in the air. Aquino noted that he had not used the summoning circle as the clock chimed 9. Rias replied tersely that she already knew. Aquino asked what they were going to do about it. Rias instructed Hyoudou to inform Sona about his death and to let Sona handle what needed to be done. Hyoudou acknowledged the order and obeyed. Rias felt a sharp guilt. A life she might have saved had been lost because of unfortunate circumstance, and her intuition had been wrong for the first time. Even as a devil, she had to accept outcomes she did not like. Issei walked through the school gates, yawning. The previous night had been difficult. He had altered the memory of a sentient being, something that had never sat well with him. Because the mind was delicate, he had spent hours ensuring the change could not be traced back to him and would not harm the fallen person's mental state. When he had returned home, his parents had looked as if they had been crying and had embraced him as if he had come back from a great danger. After some time he opened the classroom door and was met with shocked faces from both teachers and students. The homeroom teacher had been about to announce that Issei Hyoudu's death had come as quite a shock when he saw Issei standing there, and the teacher stared at him, mouth open. Issei felt puzzled and asked whether he should not be there. The homeroom teacher stammered that the student council had reported otherwise. Issei sighed, too tired to follow the confusion. When he reached his desk, he discovered a vase placed there, like those used in memorial displays. He explained that he was still alive. The homeroom teacher said that they had received news that Issei had died the previous day in a car accident and that he would inform the student council. Before the teacher could move, the classroom door slammed open. A girl with long crimson hair quickly scanned the room until her eyes found Issei. She moved to him with urgency, took his arm firmly, and looked him intently in the face, insisting that he come with her. Without hesitation, she led him out of the classroom. Issei shouted in confusion, demanding to know what was happening. Issei sat in the old school building that doubled as the Occult Research Clubroom. He relaxed on an expensive-looking sofa while Rias Gremory held his right hand, hopeful. Himejima Aquino, a third year with long black hair tied with an orange ribbon and violet eyes, watched nearby with a calm, refined air. In a corner, Tuju Kaneko, a first year with short white hair and a cat-shaped hairpin, ate sweets and observed him closely. Kiba Hyoudou leaned against the wall behind him. Curious about their purpose, Issei decided to take a gamble. He asked a blunt personal question, and Kaneko rejected it coldly, causing him to slump in mock despair. Deciding to try again, he asked why they had brought him there. Rias confirmed his name as Hyoudou Issei, and he answered yes. She then asked how he had managed to survive his encounter with the fallen angel the previous night. Issei blinked at the term and answered uncertainly, which irritated Rias. Aquino smiled and teased that the club president refused to answer. Kaneko suggested getting the answer by force, and Issei, surprised by the threat from someone so small, watched as her grip crumpled a nearby metal statue like a tin can while she glared at him. The display made him genuinely uneasy. Aquino asked what the student council thought of him, and Rias said that Sona had wanted him too but had been talked out of it. Rias then revealed that the club planned to make him one of them. When Issei asked what she meant, Rias and Akino turned their attention to him and asked whether he would become a devil if given the chance. He tried to hide his nervousness and asked for clarification. Rias explained that everyone present was a devil. At her cue, all of them stood and unfurled leathery black wings from their backs to demonstrate. Rias expected shock, awe, fear, or greed, but Issei merely studied the wings with curiosity and called them fascinating rather than reacting dramatically. The club members exchanged bewildered looks. Kiba asked whether Issei had encountered devils before. Issei said he had met some similar beings and asked whether succubi, demons, vampires, or yokai counted, rejecting each as being the same as devils. Rias stared incredulously at how casually he accepted their explanation. Issei admitted that his earlier cluelessness had been an attempt to tease them. At that moment, Issei's phone rang. He apologized, gathered his things, and left the room, leaving the devils to discuss him. After he left, Rias asked for their impressions. Kiba suggested Issei was hiding something, which was not surprising given how recently they had met him. Akino found him very interesting. When they turned to Kaneko, she hesitated and then said she believed he knew natural energy techniques. The room fell silent at the claim. Kaneko explained that she had sensed natural energy, a lot of it, and that while she could tell he was human, normal humans did not carry that much energy. Each member of the club pondered the strange human in their own way. Finally, Rias realized she had forgotten to ask him for his answer. Draig asked how Issei had managed to get out of that one. Issei told Draig that it was an essential skill to be able to bullshit his way out of any situation, especially when the supernatural was involved. He had skipped class and wandered into a convenience store during school hours, having found it easy to bypass the guards by simply jumping the 3-meter wall surrounding the school. Draig warned that they were still devils and that Issei had managed to attract not only them but fallen angels as well. He reminded Issei that he could not hide forever and needed to decide what to do. Issei sighed and said he would cross that bridge when he got there, then told Draig to shut up. After buying a manga, Issei was walking home when he narrowly dodged a spear of light hurled by a man in a gray trench coat and fedora. Black feathered wings flapped behind the man as he hovered and sneered down at Issei, telling him that Rainier had claimed to have killed him. Issei cursed under his breath, admitting he had not thought that through. The man said it did not matter and that he would finish the job himself, then attacked again. Issei begged for an explanation, asking why they wanted to kill him when he had done nothing to them. The fallen lowered his spear and explained that Issei carried a dangerous sacred gear, a relic of power that could harm them. The fallen dismissed Issei as a human who should just die. Issei thought the whole situation was cliché. Narration explained what sacred gears were, relics of power granted to humans by God to give them a fighting chance against supernatural beings. They were the source of miracles in that world. Issei pretended not to know what sacred gears were, feigning ignorance to hide what he really knew. The fallen renewed his assault, throwing more spears of light. One close shot grazed Issei's shirt and tore it. The fallen shouted in frustration and summoned a blue spear that felt far more lethal than the others. He charged, but Issei did not see him come. The moment Issei sensed the surge of killing intent, he was pulled into another scene. Issei found himself in the middle of a chaotic battlefield. The air was thick with the tension of battle and the clash of steel rang out. Cries of pain and anger echoed around him. In that nightmare of a field stood a child no older than 10 or 11, locked in combat and extracting a dagger from an opponent. The child felt a sudden surge of killing intent behind him and turned just as a spear came in his direction. The moment blurred. Donasik could not understand what had happened. He had used his best weapon, a blue spear of light, and suddenly found himself on the ground with his face pressed against pavement. He had been fighting a human and, despite being a veteran of the Great War of the Three Factions, he had been overwhelmed. In an instant he had been disarmed of initiative and pinned. Issei had him immobilized, arm trapped so securely that Donasik could not move. Donasik swore under his breath. Issei stared at his captive with wide eyes. He had not meant to do that. He had reacted on reflex. He flinched when he felt the subtle shift in the air that indicated a magic circle being used. A group of devils called his name, and Issei resisted the urge to groan at the sudden audience. While everyone was distracted, Danasik took advantage of a momentary opening, broke free of the hold, and flew straight into the sky. As he ascended, he fixed Issei with a hard look and told him to remember the name Danasik before disappearing. Issei sighed and turned to the devils behind him. They called him Hyoudou-san and asked what had happened. Issei said he could not tell them and then ran off. Issei greeted Matsuda and Motohama as he entered the classroom. Matsuda asked what had happened yesterday and Motohama added that Rias Gremory had taken Issei away and he had not returned. Issei shrugged and explained that Rias had been curious. As president of the Occult Research Club, she had been concerned when she heard he had died and then reappeared, so she wanted to investigate whether anything supernatural was involved. Motohama remarked that the news that Issei had died had shocked everyone and that their teacher had been startled when Issei walked back into class. Issei said he was alive and only wanted to relax and forget his troubles. Matsuda grinned and said he knew the perfect way to make Issei relax. Motohama stood up and produced a rare comedy DVD he had managed to get. Motohama invited Issei to watch it with them during their usual after-school hangout. Issei pretended to be overwhelmed by his friend's persistence, tears of relief at their support sliding down his cheeks. Matsuda reminded him that they were friends and would stick together no matter what. Motohama agreed, calling them like brothers. Their joking stopped when Rias Gremory called out from the hallway, asking whether Issei was there. Issei recognized her and instinctively called her senior sister. One of the girls nearby muttered a disparaging remark about the way he addressed her, but Matsuda and Motohama, shocked that Rias was looking for him, shouted his name and fell silent about their earlier comments. Rias approached and told Issei to come with her. Issei protested that he still had classes, but Rias warned not to force her to drag him again, and he followed her out with a reluctant shrug. Later, sitting behind her desk, Rias told Issei that she wanted him to join her peerage. Issei asked why, and Rias explained that he possessed something called a sacred gear. She warned that fallen angels would continue to attack him. Even if he could defend himself, he was still human and could be injured. Rias said it only took one strike to change everything. Rias offered protection by making him part of her peerage. She explained that to join he would need to be resurrected as a devil using an evil piece, a ruby-red pawn she produced from under her desk. With it, he would become part of her peerage and be protected as a member of the Gremory household. She added that with hard work he could rise in rank and gain many companions and responsibilities. Issei admitted he was tempted by the safety and the chance for a new life, but he said he could not accept immediately because he did not know enough about devils and wanted to be sure. Rias understood and proposed that he join their club to learn more about them. In return, they would protect him from the fallen angels until he made his decision. Issei agreed. Rias introduced herself formally as Rias Gremory and bowed with noble courtesy. Akino Himejima then stepped forward and introduced herself gracefully, asking Issei to take care of her. Kaneko Tuju gave a brief, curt introduction before returning to her snack. Kiba Yudo smilingly introduced himself and expressed hope that they would get along. Issei returned a modest introduction and thought to himself that, whatever came next, life was about to become a lot more lively. Rias sat behind her desk, sipping Akino's tea while she explained to Issei that, as a club member, it was her responsibility to help him adapt to the world of devils. Issei had many questions, but he blurted out excitedly that he wanted to know if he could have a group of admirers. Rias chuckled and set the teacup down, then explained that he might need to be promoted to a high-class devil to achieve that kind of status. Issei asked what made a devil high-class. Rias began to explain the devil hierarchy system and their various abilities. She started from the beginning, telling him that devils generally looked like humans except for their wings, and that all devils possessed superhuman strength, endurance, and enhanced senses such as sight and hearing. She added that devils were nocturnal and could see clearly in the dark, and that all devils had an ability called language, which allowed them to understand any language they heard. When Issei asked whether the language ability worked for television or music, Rias confirmed that it did. The idea that he could finally understand the foreign girls in Matsuda's videos made Issei grin. Rias went on to explain that devils shared a common weakness. Anything associated with the biblical god could harm them, and prolonged exposure to such power could be deadly. She also said that light was dangerous for devils because it represented divine power. Issei listened, recalling what he had already seen and how frightening those attacks could be. Rias outlined the hierarchy, ultimate class devils at the top, including the 4 Satans, great kings, archdukes, dukes, princes and princesses, and clan heirs, high-class devils such as marquises, margraves, viscounts, and barons, mid-class devils including baronets and dames, and finally low-class devils, which Issei would become if he chose to be reincarnated. Issei admitted he did not think he would impress anyone with a low rank. Rias pointed out that Hyoudou was a low-class devil, and Hyoudou confirmed that Rias herself was also a low-class devil, speaking with a pleasant, confident smile. Aquino added that low-class devils could be promoted if they worked hard, which lifted Issei's hopes. Rias explained the 3 modern paths to promotion: contracts for fulfilling clients' wishes, military accomplishments during crisis situations, and raiding games, which allowed devils to test and showcase their abilities against each other. She emphasized that raiding games were the most popular method because they raised reputation and could lead to promotion. Issei asked what kinds of requests devils handled. Rias explained that, as a high-class devil, her summons tended to involve urgent matters like removing curses or defeating attacking monsters. Aquino said her clients were often executives or members of high society and that her work often involved helping those clients manage stress. Kaneko described doing smaller tasks, from assisting with games to participating in harmless promotional photo shoots. Rias added that Hyoudou helped clients by offering support and relief from stress in appropriate ways. Issei suddenly became uncomfortable and tense, and Rias asked if he was all right. He erupted in a jealous outburst about Hyoudou's popularity and charm, complaining that Hyoudou was good-looking, behaved like royalty, and could even cook traits that made Issei feel inadequate. Everyone stared, and Issei coughed awkwardly afterward. Rias told him that, as a temporary devil, he could begin by handing out summoning circles to people who might want to summon them. Staring at the stack of papers, Issei thought that the path to becoming a high-class devil was long. After the briefing, Issei rode his bike to meet a contractor who had requested Kaneko. Kaneko was busy with other duties, so this assignment would be Issei's first real introduction to summoning work. He felt oddly nervous as he stood outside an apartment and knocked on the door. A man with long hair and glasses answered briefly, looking disheveled and unkempt. Before Issei could properly introduce himself, the man slammed the door in his face. Issei called out in surprise, and the man shouted back through the door that he did not want any of Issei's wares. Issei explained that he was not a salesman but the devil the man had summoned. The man hesitated, peeking his head out to ask if Issei was really a devil, then slammed the door again, insisting he had wanted Kaneko instead. Issei called back a dismissive remark and prepared to move on. Someone inside told him that she was busy and that he should go home. Issei knocked on the door repeatedly and demanded to be let in. A voice from within angrily told him to screw off. Issei warned that he would not stop and that he could wait the whole night if he had to. The occupant finally relented and opened the door. Issei stepped into a room crowded with anime merchandise and immediately complimented the collection. Morisawa asked what Issei could do, and Issei answered that it depended on the wish. Morisawa expressed doubt and produced a winter edition North High uniform, saying he wanted Kaneko to cosplay as Yuki and carry him in her arms. Issei winced inwardly at the idea of dressing like a woman again, a memory he clearly did not want to revisit, but he kept silent. Morisawa grinned at his own idea and called Issei a genius. He then asked Issei for his name. Issei introduced himself as Hyoudou, and Morisawa gave his own name. With that brief introduction, they shared a moment of camaraderie, a mutual acknowledgement of their shared enthusiasm. Issei admitted he did not particularly want to grant that specific wish, and when Morisawa pressed for demonstrations of ability, Issei claimed he could make his left hand talk. Morisawa suggested ventriloquism, and Issei called out for Draig to wake up. Draig complained about being roused and asked why he had been awakened. Issei told Draig to speak to the human, and Draig remarked that the situation was rather impressive. Morisawa examined an impressive Dragon Ball collection on display and revealed his appreciation for the series. He boasted about trying to call on Super Saiyan powers when the show first came out. Issei countered by recalling that he had attempted a Kamehameha wave when he first saw it. Drake sighed at the two of them arguing over who had the better anime imitation, the exasperation of the dragon cutting through their rivalry. Issei offered to show more of his tricks, and when a gap appeared in the conversation, he filled it with another casual demonstration. The two enthusiasts continued to trade proud recollections and competitive jabs, the shop filled with the hum of shared passion. And easy, if teasing, friendship. Issei pedaled furiously, determined to reach his first ever summon. It was his first week as a temporary devil and so far he was enjoying it. The club members were kind and willing to help him understand what being a devil meant. He still remembered the lecture the day after he joined the club. He awoke to a chaotic misunderstanding at home that involved his family and Rias. The confusion was quickly cleared up, but the memory left him flustered. On the way to school, the reactions from other students were predictably mixed and loud. Several boys shouted angrily at him for walking with Rias, while a number of girls hurled insults and warnings. Issei, aware of his own reputation as one of the school's notorious perverts, felt both proud and slightly dismayed by the attention. He enjoyed the jealous looks and angry glares but would have preferred fewer threats. At breakfast his parents had behaved oddly, moving and speaking in an unnatural, limp way as if something temporary had affected them. Issei worried for them, but Rias reassured him that it was nothing to be concerned about and that it would wear off quickly. She said farewell and told him she would arrange for someone to check on him later before leaving for her classes. The moment she left, Matsuda jabbed Issei in the back of the head, nearly sending him toward the marble pillars at the entrance. Matsuda and Motohama glared and demanded to know why he had been walking with Rias. The courtyard filled with students pressing for an explanation, their voices rising into a crowd. Nearby, two high-class devils watched and exchanged words about Issei. Sona, Rias's childhood friend and the student council president, remarked that this was the first time she had seen him up close. Rias confirmed that she had seen something special in him at once and asked Sona if she had brought what was requested. Sona produced a folder and explained that she had investigated the boy thoroughly. She reported that he truly did appear to be a unique case. There were no records of him from preschool or grade school and no birth certificate. The only traceable documents were recent adoption papers from a year ago. She described a recent pattern of behavior where he had signed up for every club, excelled briefly, then quit. Rias listened, intrigued by anything that touched on her prospective pawn, particularly his past. Sona closed the folder with a decisive motion and emphasized that there was nothing earlier than the adoption paperwork, no pictures, no friends who could vouch for him, nothing to connect him to a history. Rias contemplated the absence of records and whether she might be able to get Issei to open up. She watched him, thoughtful, while Issei wrestled his two friends into a headlock nearby, still trying to steady himself after the commotion. Issei sat alone at his table, drawing on a sketchpad. He wondered who the club president would send and hoped it might be Akino or maybe Kaneko. When the girls shrieked, he realized his hopes were not going to be fulfilled. A blonde approached with a smile, and Issei glared. One of the girls complained about the order of guests, mentioning an older sister figure and Kiba, and another warned Kiba that Issei might be a bad influence. Kiba ignored the warnings and told Issei that the club president had sent him to fetch him, asking Issei to come along. Issei stood, put his sketchpad in his bag, and walked with Kiba while the others continued to shout warnings about Issei corrupting Kiba. Issei sighed and wondered why the girls said such things. Kiba then asked what Issei thought about being a temporary devil. Issei considered how kind they had been and how different they were from other devils he had met. They had been willing to help. He said it had been nice, though he was disappointed he had not formed a contract the previous night. Kiba reminded him that was expected since Issei was not truly a devil yet. Issei then asked what it was like for Kiba to be summoned by so many girls. Kiba answered that it was fine, which surprised Issei. Being frequently summoned seemed like it would be exciting. They arrived at the club room. Kaneko sat on the couch eating sweets, quietly keeping to herself. Another girl handed clothes to the club president, and Akino thanked her. Issei noticed there was a shower in the clubroom and felt quietly pleased to have joined. Someone made an unkind remark about Issei's expression, which made him start to speak, but Akino finally acknowledged his presence with a gentle "oh my" and commented on the new member. Akino carried herself with a composed, graceful presence and asked how Issei's night job had been. Issei replied that it had been fine and smiled sheepishly. Akino seemed pleased. Rias emerged from the shower, dressing in the school uniform and drying her hair, and thanked everyone for waiting because she had spent the night at Issei's house. Issei stammered that it had been no trouble. Rias then asked what he thought about being a temporary devil. Issei recalled spending the previous night with a fellow enthusiast, talking about anime and games. He said the experience had been different from what he expected but not unpleasant. He had hoped for something different and tried to hide a rueful grin. Akino gently reminded him that certain requests were handled by specialists and experienced devils, and another student teased him for his thoughts, which embarrassed him. Rias refocused everyone on the main matter and asked Issei to show them his sacred gear. Issei asked what a sacred gear was. Rias explained that they knew he had one. Issei hesitated and said it was nothing special, but Rias asked him to trust them and show it. He sighed and agreed. Issei asked his inner partner Drake to make the demonstration look like a twice critical, and Drake reassured him that it would. Satisfied, Issei raised his left arm and his boosted gauntlet appeared, resembling a twice critical. Rias looked at the sacred gear with a raised eyebrow, studying it closely. Issei shrugged and dismissed the gauntlet, freeing his arm. Rias smiled and told Issei not to belittle himself. Having any sacred gear was fortunate, especially a dragon type. With enough training he might become powerful enough for promotion, and Rias said she expected great things from him. Issei sighed despondently as he trudged slowly down the road. He had never gotten to fulfill Miltan's wish. A frightening man had made him watch a video called Magical Girl Milky Spiral 7 with him. It had been a decent show, but he had not been able to watch at his leisure because Miltan kept copying whatever the show did. It was enough to tire him physically and mentally. That, along with memories of himself in similar clothes, made him skip school and sit in the park. He settled on a bench and looked up at the sky, feeling peaceful and nostalgic for a simpler time he no longer had. His thoughts were cut off by a surprised cry from the girl in front of him. Her headdress had blown off in a gust of wind, and she looked embarrassed. Issei stood to help her. He asked if she was all right. The blonde looked up, emerald green eyes sparkling in the sun, and thanked him. As she took his offered hand, another gust of wind revealed her face more clearly. She had long blonde hair flowing down her back, split bangs, and a single strand that stuck up. She wore a dark teal nun's habit with light blue accents, a brown satchel on her right hip, and brown boots with black straps in an X pattern. A silver cross hung around her neck. Issei handed her headdress back, noticing a white veil accented with blue. She thanked him with a smile, and Issei found himself blushing at her grateful expression. He then noticed an open suitcase on the pavement with its contents scattered. He moved to help gather the items. When she tried to tell him she could manage, he insisted on helping. He picked up the scattered belongings and handed them to her. She listened with an embarrassed smile and apologized for the trouble, saying she had simply tripped. Her Japanese was imperfect, with occasional Italian words mixed in. Feeling sympathetic, Issei switched to smooth Italian and offered to guide her to the church. She was surprised and delighted that he could speak Italian and gratefully accepted his offer. Issei decided not to mention that he was a potential devil. They had taken only a dozen steps when they heard crying nearby. A small boy, about 8 or 9, was on the pavement holding his knee. The sister hurried over and placed a hand on the boy's injury. Gentle green light gathered at her palm, and the boy's wound visibly healed. Issei recognized the light as a sacred gear. The boy thanked the sister, and she explained that she had used her healing power, a gift she said came from God. Her smile carried a bittersweet quality, the kind someone wore after doing all they could and still feeling the weight of failure. Issei understood that look well. A flash of memory tugged at him. He remembered being in the middle of a fight, bringing his arm down as he shouted for Chow Chow to stay back. He had not been focused on the soldiers or the constructed monsters around him. His attention had been fixed on a small, childlike figure behind them. The figure had long black hair and gray eyes, and there had been something off about the ears hidden beneath the hair. He had tried to warn that figure not to trust those who surrounded her. An enemy had taunted him, saying no one could defeat 3 high-tier opponents alone. Issei's expression had hardened with resolve. He had vowed to stop them. As he warned the childlike figure to listen, a lightning-quick attack had been launched toward him, and he had narrowly avoided it. That memory snapped back to the present. They reached the church on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown trees and shrubbery. The sister's face lit up with pure relief at seeing the building. She expressed how glad she was to have found it. Issei began to say goodbye, but she hesitated, calling for a moment more as she turned. Asia thanked him for his help. Issei apologized and explained that he wished he could stay but had an appointment. He also worried that the Occult Research Club would be angry if they discovered he had entered a church, the headquarters of their natural enemy. Asia began to protest, but Issei reassured her that they would see each other again and introduced himself as Issei Hyoudou. Asia realized her manners, introduced herself as Asia Argento, and asked him to call her Asia. Issei bid her farewell, and Asia returned the goodbye to Issei. Waving at the sister, Issei left the church, thinking she was a very kind girl. When he returned to the clubroom, they learned that a stray devil had been found nearby. Strays, devils who had abandoned their masters, were to be eliminated when discovered. The devil had been reported in a warehouse on the outskirts of town. When they arrived, a metallic smell filled the air, making the warehouse feel tense. They stopped at the entrance. Rias explained to Issei that this was a good opportunity for him to learn how a devil fought and what their traits were. Issei asked what she meant, puzzled. Rias nodded as they resumed walking and described how, after the Great War and the decline of many pure-blooded clans, Beelzebub had developed the evil piece system modeled on chess. She outlined the roles of king, queen, bishop, knight, rook and pawn and how each piece had its own unique traits. Issei said he thought he understood, concluding that each piece had specialties and weaknesses. Rias complimented him on his quick grasp. Rias added that evil pieces were commonly used in raiding games, the competitions that could influence a devil's standing in the underworld. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, the metallic smell mixed with damp rot, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Rias asked if any of them had participated in a raiding game. Aquino shook her head and explained that for the club president to appear in a proper arena she would need to meet certain requirements and was not yet eligible. Issei opened his mouth to respond, but a deep rumble cut him off. Something large was approaching. Rias announced that they had come to eliminate the stray devil visser. A booming voice came from the darkness, the devil taunting that it smelled something foul and something delicious and that it wanted to taste it. A figure appeared, floating in midair with its lower body obscured by shadow. The figure stepped forward, revealing a woman-like upper body and the lower half of a four-legged beast, reminiscent of a centaur, gripping a lance in each hand. Issei thought he should be surprised, but after seeing so many strange things in his life he could not muster much shock. Rias mocked the beast's appearance, calling it fitting for a devil. The creature lunged forward, threatening to tear them apart. Rias called Yuto. Kiba responded and sprinted toward the devil with his sword ready. Rias explained that Kiba was a knight and that knights had heightened speed. Kiba easily sidestepped a spear move and with a swift strike disarmed the monster, neutralizing its attacking limbs. Rias praised Kiba's skill and turned to Kaneko, noting that Kaneko was a rook, a piece defined by raw strength and high defense. The monster attempted to stomp down on Kaneko, and Issei worried for the small club member. In the next instant, Kaneko lifted the attacker and hurled it into the wall, demonstrating the rook's absolute strength. Issei watched Kaneko and remembered a client's offhand remark that they made Kaneko carry them like a princess. He resolved not to anger her. Aquino stepped forward, laughing softly as she signaled her readiness. Rias explained that Aquino was the queen, possessing a combination of traits from pawn, knight, bishop and rook, and that she specialized in elemental magic. Aquino raised her hand and called down bolts of lightning that struck the devil again and again. Her expression was intense even as she smiled. The force of her magic overwhelmed the rogue creature. Rias told Aquino to stop and then asked the rogue devil if it had any last words. The monster groaned that it wanted to be killed. Rias extended her hand and summoned a swirling crimson and black energy that consumed the devil, leaving only ash where it had stood. Issei watched the spot and murmured to himself about ashes. After the encounter, Issei asked the club president what piece he would be if he joined their peerage. Rias said she wanted him to be her pawn. Issei smiled inwardly at the thought of being a pawn and found it fitting for himself. He thought about Juggernaut Drive, the power of the boosted gear combined with divine dividing, which temporarily removed the seals placed on the two heavenly dragons in exchange for extreme strain on the user. Even wielding a power capable of killing gods, he was still too young and inexperienced to stand alone against the Chaos Brigade's full might, as shown by the many wounds and a few broken bones he had sustained in past battles. He also recalled the Dimension Lost ability, which used mist to transfer people and objects to another dimension. Rumor had it that George had used it to transfer an entire town and its inhabitants at once. Annihilation Maker could create monsters that defied physics, limited only by the wielder's imagination, and in the hands of certain people could threaten the world. The true Longinus, one of the 5 holy relics of the Church, the first Longinus, the god-killing spear that pierced the side of Jesus Christ, was unquestionably the most powerful sacred gear. It spoke to Issei's skill that he had lasted 2 hours against them through sheer determination, even injuring all of them. Cao Cao had effectively lost his left eye. Issei, or what was left of his mind, thought grimly that at least if he died he had left that man a reminder of who he was. As Issei began to rear up to fight the Chaos Brigade again, prepared to go down fighting, Vala's voice cut through his dazed thoughts and stopped him. Vali told him to stop and that he had done enough. Issei stammered Vala's name in disbelief. Another ally, speaking in a playful, cat-like tone, addressed Hyoudou Issei and agreed that Vala was right, urging them to let the others handle the enemy. A weary senior remarked that Vala should have introduced his rival at a better time than while they were rescuing him from the Chaos Brigade. Vala activated Divide. Vala and his platoon and teachers charged the army, and Issei's only thought was a plea that Vala save her. Issei muttered to himself that he hoped this contractor would be one of those goth girls and laughed at the thought. He had been given this location and, by luck, actually received a female contractor this time. He stood before the door of a large, expensive house in the wealthier part of town and rang the bell, introducing himself as the temporary devil they had summoned and apologizing for the wait. A deep, gravelly voice answered that the door was locked, accompanied by heavy footsteps approaching. Issei panicked at the thought that it might be her father and worried about what to say. When the footsteps reached the door, he looked up with a smile he hoped was charming. A small, high-pitched exclamation came from beyond the doorway. His smile froze. A towering, intimidating figure stood before him, arms like solid pillars, thighs like carved stone, and a face that could have belonged to a mafia enforcer, all topped by a colorful wig and an unusual magical girl outfit. The contrast was surreal and deeply unsettling. Issei trembled and stammered that he had come to grant their wish. The figure responded that they wanted Miltan turned into a magical girl and struck a flamboyant pose. Issei inwardly reeled at the bizarre request and tried to suggest other options, even joking that perhaps they should try another planet. The figure answered that Miltan had already gone to another planet but had not received powers there. Issei was baffled that they had gone so far for help and wondered how he could possibly assist if even those people had failed. He apologized that he could not grant powers. The figure reacted angrily, flexing in a way that emphasized their intimidation and demanded to be given magical girl powers in a voice that did not fit the costume. Issei felt overwhelmed and nearly broke down. Unknown to him, his clubmates were holding a meeting about him. Aquino suggested to Rias, the club president, that he might know more than he was letting on. Rias agreed that she had felt the same. Hyoudou observed that his sacred gear had shown signs of being a twice critical and admitted he had expected more from someone like him. Rias recalled reading in the Grimoire library that it had taken the form of a twice critical and wondered if, just possibly, it was the boosted gear. Kaneko quietly proposed the possibility that he might be a Longinus wielder. Another member marveled that such a powerful weapon could have been hiding in plain sight and noted the image of a crimson gauntlet and the red dragon emperor. Rias picked up on that line of thought and added that from the way he carried himself, she suspected he knew what it was and, more importantly, how to use it. They questioned why he would lie about something like that when wielding a Longinus was a rare distinction. Kaneko suggested it might have to do with his past and that he did not want anyone to know about it. Rias pointed out that until they could confirm anything, it was all speculation. Aquino asked the president directly for her opinion. Rias replied that she still wanted him on their side regardless of his past. If he was who they suspected, he might help her resolve the complications in her marriage with Riser. Her peerage agreed. Issei woke, staring at the ceiling and thinking that the dream had been a bad omen. He dismissed the idea that his past could dictate his future as though his life were an anime and scoffed at himself. He rose to get ready for school and checked the clock. When he realized it was already 7:30, he panicked at being late. After showering and dressing as fast as he could, he ran out the door for school. It was a Saturday. Issei stood before the empty school gates, staring at them and forcing himself to accept his mistake, though the admission felt half-hearted. Frustration flared, and he muttered to himself about how he could have forgotten what day it was. Shaking off his anger, he decided to walk to the park. At the park he bought a drink and sat on a bench, letting the cool breeze and overcast sky calm him. He wondered about Ophis and whether she was all right. He told himself that someone as powerful as she was would be safe, but still hoped her companions had managed to get her out without trouble. Asia then called his name and explained awkwardly that she had been assigned to the church recently but had wanted to see him. Issei looked at her with fondness and thought how innocent she was to come just to visit. He told her he had wanted to see her too and asked how she was adjusting to town. Their stomachs rumbled at the same time, drawing embarrassed blushing from both of them. After an awkward moment, Issei invited Asia to lunch and she agreed. At the restaurant, Asia stared at the menu in confusion, clearly unused to such choices. Issei decided to order for her, telling the server that she would have the same as him. When the plates arrived, Asia hesitated over the burger and asked if utensils were available. Issei demonstrated how to eat a burger without them, taking a big bite, and Asia watched with wide-eyed wonder before smiling and beginning to eat her own. He thought that her sheltered upbringing explained her reactions. Later, Asia pointed toward a familiar building. She asked what it was, and Issei explained that it was a game center where friends could play and have fun. When he noticed sadness cross her face at the mention of friends, he insisted they go inside. Asia nodded and followed him. They spent the afternoon enjoying the attractions together and made the most of the time. Asia was having the best day of her life. She and Issei spent the afternoon at the game center. She lost at a racing game, beat Issei in a fighting game, and they even took pictures together in a photo booth. The photos of them smiling and laughing were something Asia would cherish forever. Asia pressed against a claw machine and pointed excitedly at the plush toys inside, telling Issei how cute one was. Issei offered to try, and after a few attempts he managed to win the Domo plush and handed it to her. Asia accepted it gratefully and promised she would take care of it. As the sun began to set, they left the game center and walked to a bench by the fountain. A few moments of silence passed before Asia asked if Issei knew about sacred gears. Issei confirmed that he did. Asia then revealed that her sacred gear was the power to heal, called Twilight Healing. Issei admitted that her power was amazing and that he felt ordinary by comparison. Asia started to cry at the memory of something painful, and Issei panicked and apologized, but she shook her head and said it was not his fault. After he nodded, Asia told him her story. Asia recounted being abandoned by her parents and growing up in the church orphanage. When she was 8, she awakened a power while helping an injured dog. The people of the church praised her as a saint and many came to be healed. Despite the attention and the people around her, she felt profoundly lonely. Left alone in the world, even among those who worshipped her, she had no one she could truly call a friend. She continued that one day she found a wounded devil who was being pursued by an exorcist. She used her power to help the devil. The devil and the exorcist fought, The exorcist was defeated, and the devil fled. When the church learned of it, they accused her of colluding with devils and cast her out. Issei breathed her name in disbelief. Asia smiled sadly and said she only wanted to be with friends, to talk and experience things with people, and to be normal. Issei reached out and ruffled her hair, asking if they were not already friends. He assured her that they had gone out together, talked, and spent time at the game center. He promised to be there whenever she wanted to go somewhere, to listen when she needed someone, and to stay with her when she was sad. Asia stared at him, tears filling her eyes, and told him he was kind. The moment felt perfect after years of isolation. Asia finally had a friend. A cold voice interrupted the peaceful scene. Asia turned to see a fallen angel hovering above the fountain. Issei narrowed his eyes and moved to position himself between Asia and the fallen angel, ready to protect her. The fallen angel called to Asia and urged her to come back, saying they had work to do. Asia looked toward Issei but then took a step forward toward the fallen angel. Issei protested that she should not go with a fallen angel. Asia ignored him and walked to the fallen angel, who insulted Issei and accused him of something done to her memories. A spear of light appeared in the fallen angel's hands, and Issei braced for an attack. Asia stepped in front of the fallen angel to shield Issei and pleaded for him to be spared. After a tense moment, the fallen angel withdrew the spear and warned Issei that he had been lucky this time but promised to seek revenge for what had been done to her. She then turned to Asia and instructed her to come along. Asia said goodbye to Issei, and the fallen angel carried her away to their headquarters at a church on the outskirts of town. Issei watched them leave, disgusted with himself because a cold, callous part of him urged him to let her go, to treat her as dead weight and walk away. He thought of the image of another girl who had been surrounded by people who worshipped her and yet had been one of the loneliest people he had known. The memory of Asia calling him kind echoed in his mind, and he realized he had never hated himself as much as he did in that moment. Issei continued to wallow in self-pity and hatred as he biked to the home of his next summoner. Earlier at the Occult Research Club, Rias had given him the location and asked if he was all right. He told the club president that he was fine. Rias remained skeptical and asked again, and he insisted he was sure before leaving. He argued with himself on the ride. He wondered why he had not acted for Asia, considering whether she had been deceived, forced, or even manipulating him. He insisted she was his friend, yet he feared that, as a devil, he had become an enemy to her world and might only cause her trouble. He resolved to go to the church the next day to clear things up, but for now he had a contract to fulfill. He called out for anyone inside and, after a pause with no answer, entered against his instincts. The air inside smelled strongly of blood. In the living room he found a man suspended in a cruciform arrangement, motionless and clearly dead, the scene unmistakably violent. A white-haired priest in clerical clothes stood nearby, grinning. The priest spoke contemptuously and introduced himself as Fried Selzen, declaring his intention to kill Issei. He rushed forward with a gun and a luminous blade, devil-killing weapons that Issei recognized. Issei dodged the first shot with a tilt of his head. The priest became frantic and unleashed a barrage of gunfire and strikes that would have overwhelmed an ordinary human. Issei moved through the assault with practiced ease and closed the distance. When the priest swung at him, Issei caught the wrist, forced him off balance, and disarmed him. Fried struggled against the hold, but a sudden distraction at the doorway pulled Issei's attention. Asia stood there with wide eyes. Her unexpected arrival in that place and at that moment startled him enough that Fried seized the opening to escape. Fried had brought Asia and mocked his actions, insisting that eliminating devil summoners was their duty. He grabbed Asia and forced her to look at the scene. She cried out until he struck her to make her comply. Issei prepared to attack, but a summoning circle flared in the middle of the room and members of the Occult Research Club appeared. Kiba restrained Issei and warned that fighting then could escalate into a larger conflict, because they were confronting a fallen angel while Issei acted as a devil. Fried reacted quickly, scooped Asia up, and activated something on the floor that made them vanish. Issei shouted after them, but they were already gone. Anger and desperation overwhelmed him. He insisted he would save Asia no matter what and ran toward the church, driven by the memory of her smiling at him during their time together. He reminded himself that he had failed to save someone once before and was determined not to fail again. Issei shouted Asia's name as he burst into the church basement, which was vast enough to feel like another building beneath the building. Fallen angel followers, dressed like the frozen priest above, glared at him and prepared to attack at a moment's notice. Asia was bound to a wooden cross and lay unconscious. Beside her, Rainier stood in a plain white dress. He prayed silently that he was not too late. He could not forgive himself if he failed her. Rainier announced that he had survived and reached this far, but she said he was too late because she had already begun the ritual and would claim Asia's sacred gear in a matter of minutes. Issei offered to let them go if they released Asia and left everyone unharmed. Rainier sneered and reminded him of a promise to repay him for their previous date, which she treated as an insult, and she ordered her followers to kill him. Issei's anger shook his body. Flames flared around his hands and forehead, his eyes glowing a golden orange. He activated his sacred gear, calling forth crimson metal gauntlets as the flames were absorbed into the boosted gear. He then unleashed the 0-point breakthrough, Absolute Zero. Ice spread through the room in an instant, freezing the subordinates in their tracks. Only Asia, Rainier, and Issei remained unaffected. Issei walked slowly and solemnly through the ice toward the altar where Asia was bound, and Rainier felt as if a god had stepped among mortals. When he reached them, Rainier stepped aside, stunned into temporary silence by the sight. Issei approached Asia and told her gently that it was him. Asia responded that it was Issei and returned his greeting. She asked why he had come. Issei smiled down and reassured her that he had promised to be there for her when she was sad. Asia returned the sentiment, saying she was happy to have a friend like him who had stayed with her until the end. Issei protested that they would still be together and that there were many things left to do, mentioning that they would go ice skating next. Asia said that sounded nice and that she had only wished for more time with him, thanking him for everything he had done for her. She closed her eyes with a peaceful smile. Issei pleaded for her to wake up, telling her they had so much more to do, that he wanted to introduce her to his parents, and begging her not to go. He refused to accept that she might be lost. Gently, Issei laid her body down and crossed her hands over her chest. He acknowledged that revenge would not bring Asia back and that it would not fix what had happened, but he felt compelled to act if not for himself, then for her. He stood and faced Rainier. Rainier recoiled, but stopped when Issei fixed his glowing eyes on her. She shivered at the intensity. Issei told her softly that it was for Asia. Rainier protested, and Asia, opening her eyes again, pleaded for him not to kill anyone for her sake. She insisted that she did not want him to do such a thing, that he should help people instead, and she told the presence named Draig that he was kind. Asia's words hit Issei hard. One impulse told him to kill Rainier for stealing Asia, while another urged him to turn away from bloodshed. He looked at Asia, who had returned to stop him from taking revenge, and then at Rainier, who stood resigned with her head bowed. As he raised his hand to end the confrontation, Asia's plea rang out once more. Her appeal stopped him. Issei closed his eyes and thought that Asia was too kind for her own good. He relaxed his gauntlet and told Rainier to go. He said he would honor Asia's final request. Asia wanted her to live, so she would be set free. Issei snapped his fingers to release the frozen followers. Rainier looked surprised and asked why. Issei explained that he owed it to Asia to fulfill her wish and that he would not kill her. He reminded Rainier that Asia's kindness was real and that he would let them leave. Rainier hesitated, then spread her wings and flew away. Left alone with the frozen followers, Issei staggered to the altar and slumped against it. He looked at Asia and smiled, tucking an errant strand of hair behind her ear. He thought that Asia's trusting innocence would have gotten along well with others. He worried about the consequences. His parents would be concerned, devils and fallen angels might be searching for him, and he could be reported to their leader. The thought of Asia scolding him made him laugh through his exhaustion. At that moment, he noticed devils entering through the door. Seeing them, Issei picked up Asia's body and rushed toward them. He knelt and prostrated himself before their leader. Issei pleaded for her reincarnation, his voice on the verge of breaking but filled with tentative hope that reached them all. He begged Rias to save her, to bring her back to life, offering to do anything and even to join her peerage if that would help. Rias hushed him and told him not to speak further. She did not need anything from him, and because it was his request she promised to reincarnate her. For the first time in 3 years Issei broke down in tears and gratefully embraced Rias, who returned the gesture gently and soothingly. Issei sobbed harder. Issei was nearly at the church entrance when he heard the flapping of wings. He looked up and saw 3 fallen angels floating above him, staring down. Donasik, the fallen angel who had once tried to kill him, told Issei that he had expected him to come and that, coming alone, Issei had given them a chance to end him before he caused any more problems. Another, with blue eyes and blonde twin tails wearing a Gothic-style outfit, taunted that Issei looked weak. The third, a tall woman whose long hair hid her right eye and who wore violet and black, sneered that creatures like Issei needed to know their place and should be crushed when seen. Issei shouted that he did not have time for their nonsense. He summoned orange flames that roared into being around his hands, bathing them in a soft golden light. The flames rushed at the 3 fallen angels, engulfed them, and then crystallized into a clear, ice-like prison. The angels struggled, surprised and unable to break free, while Issei ignored them and ran for the church door, slamming it open. Underneath the cross stood Fried. Fried had been greeting him loudly and taunting that it was already too late because Rainier had started the ceremony, but he stopped mid-sentence when Issei suddenly appeared before him with his arms crossed and unleashed a technique called 0-point breakthrough. Fried froze in shock. Rias and her peerage stepped out of the summoning circle and encountered the sight of the 3 fallen angels encased in that strange ice-like material, thrashing fruitlessly while nothing they did managed to dent it. Aquino inspected it closely, sensing the unmistakable presence of fire within what looked like ice and puzzling over the contradiction. The trapped angels demanded to be freed, but Rias refused. Kaneko answered that there was only one possible culprit, Hyoudou Issei. Rias decided they needed to help Issei and the Occult Research Club moved toward the church. The frozen angels continued to shout as the group approached, but their words went unanswered. Inside the church, Asia's body lay in the center of a devil's circle. Rias asked Issei if he was sure he wanted Asia to be reincarnated as a devil. Issei affirmed that he was. The club president invoked her name and commanded Asia Argento to return to this land as her servant and become a devil. Wind picked up as the bishop piece slowly sank into Asia's body. Rias declared that Asia would live this life as her bishop. When the light finally faded, the piercings in Asia's hands and feet were gone. Asia slowly opened her eyes and called for Issei. Issei approached her and embraced her, tears of joy falling as he held his friend alive in his arms. Asia returned the embrace, and the warmth of her presence reassured him that she had come back. After the party, Issei returned home. It was already dark and his parents were sleeping in their room. He walked to his own room and entered the bathroom. Once the door was closed, his body shook uncontrollably as he braced himself against the sink. His voice was hoarse as he asked Drake how bad it was. Drake's voice replied, telling him not to be too harsh on himself and reminding him that by all rights he should not still be alive. The Juggernaut drive consumed life force. A normal human could not be expected to last long in that form. Issei had managed 2 full minutes, which was more than could reasonably be expected. Issei made a bitter comment about the situation, trying and failing to sound light-hearted. He was interrupted by a coughing fit. Hunched against the sink, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. Now that he was alone, he allowed himself to appear weak. His face was pale, with heavy bags under his eyes, and a faint stain marked his chin. He sat alone in the bathroom for a long while before asking Drake how long he had left. Drake estimated 5 years if Issei avoided supernatural contact and refrained from using magic, but given his involvement with devils and fallen, the realistic estimate was closer to 1.5 years. Drake apologized. Issei listened with a detached calm. He asked himself whether it was selfish to want more time to be with friends and to see more of the world. Drake reminded him that he had been a strong and admirable partner, that he had fought off the Juggernaut drive's curse on his own, and that he deserved better than the fate that seemed to be closing in. Issei blinked, forcing a small smile. He reminded himself he still had people to find and promises to keep. Office, Kunu he had promised to return to Kyoto when she was older and more to do. Talking to himself steadied him. If this was all the time he had, then he would make the most of it. Those were the first odd thoughts running through his head when he returned home that evening. Even stranger, Rias and Asia were standing at the entrance, as if they had been waiting. Rias instructed Issei to carry the boxes inside. Issei asked why and whose the boxes were. Rias explained that they contained Asia's belongings and that, starting today, Asia would be staying with him. Rias then addressed his parents, asking for permission for Asia to stay with the Hyoudou family. Issei's parents exchanged looks, weighing the situation. His father expressed concern about leaving a young woman in the house with their impulsive son and mentioned that they might feel guilty if anything happened. Issei bristled internally at the lack of trust but remained silent. Rias pressed on. She suggested that Asia could be taken in as a member of the household. Asia, who had faith in Issei, said that she wanted to stay because he had helped her when she came to town and continued to be kind to her at school. Issei felt his face heat at the praise. His parents softened at the thought of Asia becoming part of the family. They asked if she was sure about staying. Asia affirmed her decision. Rias requested that the Hyoudous take care of Asia, and after a moment of deliberation, they agreed to welcome her. An awkward but heartfelt exchange followed as Issei's parents imagined hopeful possibilities for the family's future. Issei's father thanked Rias for bringing the matter to them. Issei's brother, moved to tears, clutched Asia's hands and pleaded for her to look after Issei. Asia reassured him with a gentle smile, saying that Issei was a kind person. With Asia settled to stay, Rias reminded her to get along with Issei's parents, and Asia promised to do her best. Issei watched the scene unfold, feeling the house grow livelier than it had been in a long time. Asia insisted that she did not want to cause trouble for anyone. Rias reminded her that when asked where she wanted to stay, Asia had said she wanted to stay at Issei's house. Asia admitted that was true but hesitated. Issei's mother reassured her that she was welcome to stay as long as she liked and might even be welcome to stay permanently. Asia bowed and expressed that she would be in Issei's and his parents' care from then on. The decision to let Asia stay at his house was made in that short conversation. Issei barely noticed Rias's soft sigh. Rias murmured the word bride under her breath. Issei realized that things were likely to become even more hectic than they already were. It was the day after the fallen angel incident. Issei entered the occult research club and greeted Rias. She returned his greeting with a smile. He sat in front of the club president and thanked her for what she had done the previous night. Rias smiled and reassured him that he need not worry. Admitted he still felt he ought to repay the debt. Rias shook her head and said that his presence was already enough, but she also asked what he had done to the fallen angels because she had never seen anything like it. Issei awkwardly suggested that it might have been magic. Rias said she finally understood what he truly was, the security eye of this generation, the one who possessed the boosted gear, the Red Dragon Emperor's gauntlet, one of the 13 Longinus, a sacred gear with the power to kill gods. From what she had seen, she also suspected he had additional abilities. Rias told Issei she felt lucky to have met him. She reached out, placed a hand lightly on his cheek as a reassuring gesture, called it a good luck charm, and tapped his forehead to convey her support. She added that if he decided to become a devil, she hoped the charm would be enough. For now, she encouraged him to keep doing what he was doing. Issei nodded and rubbed his forehead. At that moment Asia, the former nun, stood near the door. She remarked that the president was very pretty and that Issei seemed attracted to her, then laughed nervously and said she needed to work harder to compete. She tried to pray out of habit but realized she could not communicate with the Lord now that she had become a devil, and she flinched at the sudden awareness. Asia sighed and said, with some sadness, that being a devil meant she could no longer speak with the Lord. Issei listened, uncertain what to say. Asia quickly assured Issei that she did not regret becoming a devil as long as she could remain with him, and she thanked the club president for giving her this new life. She bowed in respect to her new master. Rias accepted the gesture and told her to do her best. Asia promised she would. Issei noticed Asia was wearing the school uniform. Asia shyly asked if it looked good. Issei complimented her, telling her she looked cute, which made her blush. Rias announced that Asia would attend their school starting that day and that she had arranged for Asia to be placed in the same class as Issei. She asked him to take good care of Asia. Issei pledged to do so, and Asia blushed even deeper at his promise. Others in the club would likely have their own reactions to the new arrangement, but for the moment the scene continued uninterrupted. Akino, Kaneko, and Kiba entered together and greeted the group with smiles. Asia bowed to them in return. With everyone present, Rias initiated a small celebration. Cake, food, and drinks appeared on the previously empty table. Rias explained that they were celebrating Asia joining her peerage and that she had prepared the food. She invited everyone to enjoy themselves, and the others agreed. Issei held the shurnai with the tiger stripe pattern up to the light and asked Drake where it had come from. The bamboo practice sword looked ordinary at first glance, but it radiated a dangerous presence that set his teeth on edge. Drake told him it came from the tiger yukai in Kyoto. Issei nodded and decided it needed to be kept somewhere safer. He slid the weapon into a special wooden case designed to suppress and conceal magical items. After Asia moved into the house, Issei resolved to hide the trophies he had collected over the years to keep her from stumbling onto them. He pulled another blade from the pile and wondered aloud to Drake about its origin. Drake confirmed it was Hrunting, the blade recovered in England. Issei frowned, turning the sword over in his hands and admitting that he did not really know how to use any of them. He shrugged and placed Hrunting in its own case. Hours later, after he had spent the afternoon cleaning the basement, Issei had come across a remarkable assortment of relics: the Shroud of Turin, Carnwennen, a copy of Aegis, Turfing, a cornucopia, and even a golden apple from the Garden of the Hesperides. Then, when he found one particular relic, he froze. He lifted it carefully. It was a crimson spear, barbed along its length and marked with vine-like runes. The weapon looked crafted for battle, an old curse tucked into polished metal and etching. Drake asked if that was Gibalg. Issei breathed the name. He remembered the spear's origin, crafted from the bones of the sea monster Koinchin and bound to ancient legend. Its point left wounds that never fully healed, and its power could reverse causality, so the outcome was inevitable once the spear was called. In short, it guaranteed the opponent's defeat. Gibalg had been given to him by the Chaos Brigade because he had been their most effective killer. It should not have been here. He had thrown it away the day he learned the truth about the Chaos Brigade and their betrayal of Ophis. It should have been in another dimension. Panic rose in his chest. Drake urged him to calm down and focus on his breathing. Issei inhaled slowly until the panicked edge passed, set the spear into another suppression case, and vowed to think about the mystery later. A memory came then, vivid as a wound. A man had leaned toward a small figure in the night, smirking and warning that being out there after dark was dangerous. His friends snickered behind him. The boy stared up at them, clutching the spear in a too small hand as the men reached out, thinking it a toy to steal. One of the drunken men asked to borrow it. The boy said the men could have it. In a flash, the spear moved with terrifying speed, striking before any of them could react. The men drew their swords, but the boy's strikes were quick and unerring. Two of them collapsed, defeated and motionless. The others tried to surround him, but he was faster than they expected. He summoned his gauntlet to his left arm. A soldier's voice broke the tension, trembling as he identified the boy as the demon child. The man dropped his sword and fled, carrying his fear into the dark, but the spear struck with a single, devastating movement and the soldier fell. The boy flicked his spear aside. Without hesitation, he fixed his calm, unreadable expression on the terrified ring of men and charged forward, relentless. A chorus of students erupted with disbelief and accusation, insisting they would never accept what they were seeing and demanding why Asia was walking with Issei Hyoudou. Someone even pointed out that it was not just Rias who had people talking, but Asia as well. In hindsight, Issei knew this was bound to happen. One of the school's notorious perverts walking with Asia Argento, the sweet and naive transfer student, would naturally spark rumors. Because he had been seen with Asia that morning, other boys decided to try their luck and confess to her as they walked to school, only to have their offers politely declined. Now many of them glared at his back with thinly veiled resentment. Issei secretly enjoyed the attention and the jealousy aimed his way, though he kept the smugness contained. Asia, sensing his stare, fidgeted and asked if something was wrong. Issei apologized and explained he had been thinking, then asked how she was adjusting to school life. He was genuinely concerned. Asia had been a nun until recently and he wondered if she would struggle with the sudden changes. He wanted to help if she had any trouble, but also hoped she would make friends. Asia smiled and said that everyone at school had been kind, teaching her about life in Japan and inviting her out to the mall to go shopping with them. They reached their classroom, where the source of Issei's unease sat in the middle of it. Matsuda and Motohama greeted Asia exuberantly, praising her hair and brightening at her good morning. The two of them wiggled with childish excitement after being acknowledged. Issei watched with a small, arrogant smile, thinking how sad it was that they found such joy in a simple greeting. His thought was abruptly cut short when Motohama suddenly jabbed him in the stomach hard enough to make him double over. Motohama demanded angrily why Issei had been seen with Asia, claiming he had heard rumors. Matsuda added that he had heard the same and wanted an explanation. The classroom quieted, everyone listening intently to the escalating confrontation. Issei downplayed it and said there was nothing special about it, but Motohama pressed him, insisting this was the opportunity they had always wanted. Asia quietly explained, with a gentle smile, that she was currently staying at Issei's house because his parents had kindly taken her in. The room fell completely silent. Matsuda reacted with stunned denial, unable to accept it, while Motohama sulked at the news. Matsuda then grew serious and asked Issei to introduce them to any women he was close to, pleading for help meeting someone. Issei inwardly resented the idea of introducing his friends to the people he cared about, but he reluctantly agreed to try and help. Issei called the one person he felt comfortable involving and arranged a compromise after a short conversation. He informed Matsuda and Motohama that the person had agreed and would even bring friends, and that they were free on Friday. The two of them eagerly copied the contact information from his phone and thanked him profusely, practically celebrating the favor. When they asked what kind of person the contact was, Issei hesitated and said she liked to cosplay. Matsuda and Motohama declared that was perfect and expressed their gratitude again. One of them speculated about the contact style, imagining a Gothic-inspired cosplayer, and Issei merely shook his head and let them enjoy their delusions. Issei resolved to let them dream on while he handled things his own way. Issei immediately slumped onto his bed the moment he and Asia returned home. He was exhausted after spending the whole day with her. He had been worried about her first day as a devil. She was too kind to refuse requests, and he had spent the day shielding her from inappropriate advances. The memory of Miltan's outfit from earlier still made him want to cry. Asia cheerfully announced that she would cook dinner, and Issei heard approving voices in the household praising how lucky they were to have her. He sighed and moved to get up, but before he could leave the bed a magic circle glowed on the floor. The figure stepped through it. With her distinctive red hair, Rias appeared as the summoning faded. She spoke in a tone that carried both urgency and vulnerability, asking Issei for his attention and support. He froze, confused by her unexpected demeanor. Rias explained that she felt she had no other option and that he was the only person she trusted for what she needed. Issei protested, suggesting someone else might be more appropriate, but Rias insisted that he was the one she wanted and asked him to stay with her. Before the situation could escalate further, Graphia, a silver-haired maid, arrived through the summoning circle and intervened. She admonished Rias about propriety and the expectations of the Gremory family, explaining that as their heiress, she should not put herself in compromising situations. Graphia introduced herself as the maid of House Gremory and asked Rias to come with her. Rias complied and began to compose herself. Graphia then turned to Issei, offered a formal bow, and greeted him. Tension filled the air as Graphia's posture made clear she was prepared to act if necessary, and Issei braced himself as well. Rias asked if Aquino could accompany her, and Graphia agreed that a close companion would be acceptable. Before vanishing in the summoning circle, Rias pressed a brief, affectionate kiss to Issei's cheek and asked to meet again the next day. Then they disappeared. Issei stared at the spot where they had been, bewildered and unsure of what had just happened. He had no explanation. Asia's voice called from downstairs, reminding him that the food was getting cold. Shaking his head to clear the confusion, Issei went down to eat. Asia had made miso soup for dinner. After school, Issei and Asia walked to the Occult Research Club room. On the way they met Kiba, who suggested that the president's problem might be connected to the house grimoire since Rias was the heiress. They entered the club room and found Rias's peerage gathered inside alongside Grafia. The atmosphere was tense, and Issei felt distinctly out of place. Grafia offered to explain the situation to Rias, but Rias declined and took a deep breath, preparing to tell everyone the truth. Without warning, magic flared and a summoning circle appeared on the floor. Flames rose and licked the ceiling, and a silhouette moved within them until the figure emerged. He appeared to be in his 20s, tall and handsome, wearing a burgundy blazer over a white dress shirt, matching pants, and black dress shoes. The newcomer announced that he had come to the human world to see Rias. He ignored Rias's icily fierce glare and approached, saying they still needed to check locations for the ceremony and the reception before the deadline. Rias's anger was more intense than Issei had ever seen. Grafia intervened before the situation could escalate, explaining for everyone in the room that the newcomer was Riser Phoenix, a pure-blooded high-class devil, the third son of the House Phoenix, and Rias's fiancé. Issei's hand reflexively reached for a weapon that was not there. Grafia noticed the movement, and Issei realized from that subtle observation that she was indeed a dangerous individual. Aquino praised the tea and credited Rias Queen for it. Aquino smiled, but Issei noticed the smile did not reach her eyes. The air around her felt colder, and Issei sensed the shift in temperature with a nervous shiver. Rias sat on the couch with Riser Phoenix at her side, his hands resting on her shoulders as he toyed with her hair. Issei stared at Riser, his gaze sharpening until the irises took on an orange hue. After several tense minutes, Rias snapped and made it clear that she would not marry Riser. Riser argued that Rias had to think about her family and the survival of the Grimoire clan. He warned that pure-blooded devils were rare and that the clan's future depended on duty more than personal wishes. Rias answered that she was the heir of the Grimoire house and that she alone would choose her husband, refusing to be forced into a match against her will. She acknowledged her duties and said she was willing to take a husband, but only one of her choosing. Riser's expression hardened and the room grew tense. A pillar of flame suddenly flared around him as he declared he would take Rias as his wife even if he had to burn every one of her servants. Asia clutched Issei's arm and trembled, alarmed by the hostile energy filling the room. Kaneko and Kiba readied themselves for a fight, and even Aquino, who had seemed cordial moments before, radiated dangerous intent. Grafia Lucifuge, known as the strongest queen, stepped in and ordered everyone to stop. She warned that if the conflict continued she would not hold back. Riser's flames faded and he conceded to withdraw for the moment. Grafia explained that their masters had anticipated this kind of dispute and had arranged a final resort, an unofficial rating game between the two parties. The announcement surprised everyone in the room. Rias voiced her bitterness at having her personal choice so thoroughly constrained, but she accepted the challenge and declared she would fight Riser Phoenix to secure her freedom. Grafia announced that she would oversee the game, and both sides agreed to the terms. Grafia said she would inform the respective households of the decision. Riser questioned whether Rias could rely on her servants in a true contest and boasted that only his peerage could match Grafia's strength. With a snap, he produced an identical demonic crest behind him from which 15 people emerged. Riser taunted them and then made a provocative display intended to humiliate Rias and her peers, which left several present embarrassed. The room went quiet when a young-looking girl with long blonde hair styled into drill-like twin ponytails pointed at Issei and accused him of being someone from 2 years ago named Haruka. Issei denied the mistake and stated plainly that his name was Issei. Riser returned the conversation to their arrangements, giving Rias's peerage 2 weeks to prepare. He declared that their next encounter would be at the rating game and told Rias to select her wedding dress. With that, he and his summoned group vanished in a column of fire, leaving Rias alone with her peerage and Grafia. After the commotion in the club room, Issei was relieved to be back in the quiet of his home, alone with his thoughts and Drake. Drake asked why Issei had decided to become a devil. Issei admitted it had been a spur-of-the-moment choice and that the girl involved reminded him of himself. Drake snorted and dismissed the comparison as laughable, but Issei insisted that everyone had problems, some worse than others. Drake probed what about her situation felt familiar. Issei considered the question and explained that she had been forced into a life she never chose, robbed of agency, and had tried and failed to change it. She had someone who could help her avoid that future yet refused to act, leaving her isolated and surrounded by people who did not believe in her. Drake argued that Issei had no obligation to intervene and that, by his own standards, he should turn away. Issei scratched at his chest and acknowledged the logic, but said he felt compelled to act. He wanted to make sure others would not endure what he had endured. Drake then promised in a sardonic tone that no one would suffer the same fate as Issei. Issei felt reassured and commented that he did not know what else he could be good for. Drake warned that that line of thinking could be dangerous in their world, but Issei brushed the fear aside, saying he did not plan on dying anytime soon and that if he were going to die he would not be discussing it now. His eyes took on a brief orange gleam as he spoke more firmly, but Drake continued to press him. Drake criticized Issei for being willing to be at the mercy of another, accusing him of hypocrisy for opposing others' subjugation while agreeing to be subjugated himself. Issei quietly affirmed that he would accept being a pawn if it meant he could help people and leave a positive mark on the world, even if he felt undeserving. He wanted to be remembered as someone who had lived fully and made a difference. Drake felt a sudden wave of pity for Issei and reflected that Issei did not deserve the hardships he had suffered. Someone like him should be allowed to find happiness. The thought comforted Issei, and the constant ache that had followed him since the Chaos Brigade disaster eased somewhat, becoming more bearable than it had been weeks before. Drake noted that Issei, as a devil, now had a stronger body and a safer life force. Devils tended to have more resilient bodies and longer lifespans, so Issei's life force had been bolstered. It was still smaller than many devils, but it indicated he might live for centuries. Issei gratefully acknowledged that the devil girl had done him a real favor. He lay on the school rooftop, having skipped classes after being reborn as a devil, using the time to observe the ritual's effects. The transformation had strengthened his body and altered his life force. Life force served as an anchor for the soul, and while every living being had one, only some humans could use it to interact with the supernatural. Those gifted few were often called espers. Issei thought about how life force enabled interaction with natural energy and how, when cultivated, it could grant abilities, heightened perception, rapid healing, and a body in peak condition. He also remembered that overuse could warp the mind, which was why many preferred more reliable aspects of the supernatural. A girl in glasses interrupted his reverie. She had violet eyes and short black hair, and when she approached she demanded to know what he was doing. Issei closed his eyes and said he had been resting. The girl reminded him that skipping classes was not acceptable. Issei tried to appeal to his new status as a recently revived devil to excuse himself, but she responded that as student council president it was her responsibility to ensure every student met their obligations. Issei muttered that he had not voted for her, and the girl stammered in surprise. A student council representative explained that the school did not hold elections for the student council president. The position was assigned based on ability and capability. Issei, amused by the unexpected formality, referenced the movies he loved and joked about supreme executive power belonging to the people. Another voice instructed Issei to be quiet and come along. Issei protested that no student could be expected to leave just because they were ordered to. The young man with short blonde hair and gray eyes, who had been silent until then, snapped and issued a firm command. He said Issei must go to his class under the authority of the student council president. He stepped forward and tried to pull Issei to his feet. Issei responded theatrically, accusing the system of being violent and dramatically proclaiming that he was being repressed in the style of the films he was mocking. In the background, Sona sighed as a headache began to form. Issei reached forward to get a cup of tea. After Riser left, the club room had a rather grim atmosphere. Grafia, the silver-haired maid, asked him why he had not defended Rias, given that the young lady seemed to hold him in high regard despite his not being a devil. The club members looked to Issei, glad for the distraction from their somber thoughts. Issei answered that, from a political standpoint, Riser had been correct. Rias was a future clan head and must consider her clan's interests. The others glared at him, but Grafia allowed a near imperceptible smile. Grafia then asked for his opinion on what Rias should do. Issei's grip on the teacup tightened until it shattered, startling everyone. When he looked up, his eyes burned with intensity. He declared that everyone deserved a chance to decide their own fate, that no one had the right to take away another's free will, and that a person should not be forced into living for others. As his voice rose, he stood and looked at each of them in turn. He turned toward Rias and promised that, if she would have him, he would fight for her and do everything he could to help her be free to choose her own path. Rias, unable to trust her voice, nodded and whispered that if he would accept that role, she would trust him as her partner in the path ahead. Grafia smiled. Later, Issei walked into the club room after classes had ended. He did not really know why he had waited until then. The entire club was already gathered, apparently waiting for him. Issei greeted everyone with a relaxed smile. One of the members teased that the club president had clearly helped Issei adjust to being a devil. Rias smiled at the newest addition to her peerage and announced their plan, a training trip in Gremory territory, with permission from the school. She then asked Issei about the rumor involving the student council. Issei admitted, with a rueful grin, that he had been quoting Monty Python. Rias invited him to explain more on the way, then led her peerage out. They arrived at a mountainside villa belonging to the Gremory clan. Issei felt awkward and wondered what he should do. Rias instructed everyone to put their things in the living room and then find their bedrooms. Issei set down the large pack he had been carrying and, after helping with chores like airing the house and cleaning, they gathered in the kitchen. Rias asked Issei and Asia to demonstrate what they could do so the team could plan. Asia apologized and explained that she did not know much about fighting and had mostly used her sacred gear. Rias said she had expected that and turned to Issei to ask what he could show. Issei prepared by steadying himself and mentally chanting an aria to guard against any lingering negative effects from the curse. He recited a short verse about a warrior's song, and a burst of flame appeared, briefly wrapping him before forming into gloves on his hands. The gloves were deep crimson with a flame-like design and an X at the base. A green jewel with the Roman numeral 3 was embedded on the back, and a silver ring adorned the index finger of his right hand. What captivated everyone most, however, were his eyes, which glowed a soft orange and radiated power. Each person felt a shiver of anticipation or unease when he met their gaze. Issei then let the flames fade and his eyes returned to their usual brown, leaving the others both relieved and impressed. Kaneko identified the display as a branch of Senjutsu, and Akino watched with interest. Issei explained that Senjutsu used natural energy in the air, absorbing it into his body and combining it with his own life force. That made him more aware and improved his sensing ability. Kaneko asked about the negative effects, wondering if using Senjutsu could lead to madness. Issei replied that he did not fully master it but that Draig helped regulate it inside him, and he had learned enough to use it safely. Kaneko nodded slowly, still watching him with narrowed eyes. Akino guided Asia in using demonic energy, telling her to gather her aura and concentrate it until she could feel it within herself. Asia responded well. Green energy coated her hands and, with a small gesture, the seed in the pot before her sprouted and grew rapidly. Issei, however, could not get it to work. The seed in front of him remained a seed. Akino corrected Issei, explaining that he needed to visualize the result while letting his power flow into his hands. Issei sighed and admitted he did not have much aptitude for this kind of magic. It was only the second day of their training trip and he was already struggling. He had never shown much facility with mystical arts. Even as a child, his pool of magical energy had been small, and his practice had focused on other, more physical aspects of his existence. He had only two reliable techniques. One was an awakened mode that relied on channeling energy around and within him, mostly managed through technique rather than conventional spells. The other did not amount to many usable spells. He did not have many magical options beyond those. Akino expressed disappointment after his show the previous day. She had had high hopes. Issei apologized and explained that he really had no talent for that kind of magic, and that he primarily used the awakened form rather than traditional spells. Her quiet disappointment stung him, and for a moment he wished he had had a normal childhood. He remembered a dark, cramped room with a small, tattered blanket and a single weak window. As a lonely child, he had wondered what lay beyond that small slice of light. The thought was interrupted by a sudden slam on the door. A figure cloaked in darkness ordered him to come, and he obeyed without question. He was led into a courtyard where a rowdy group of grown men had gathered, all armed with a variety of weapons. A man handed him a dagger that looked almost like a short sword in his small hands and nodded without words. He understood what was expected and advanced toward the crowd with a calm expression. The boosted gear appeared on his arm and he met the challenge without fear, moving with focused determination in a tense, energetic confrontation that felt like something out of an action sequence. Later, Issei walked to a quiet clearing in the forest near the villa after asking Rias for a private place to train. He sat against a tree and began to breathe deeply, letting nature energy gently flow into his core. He extended his senses outward and felt the life all around him: the trees, insects, the leaves, and the distant drip of a small pond. Then he sensed someone approaching. Kaneko stepped into the clearing and froze when she noticed his attention. Issei smiled and asked why she was there, noting that she normally trained with the club president and the others. The question brought her back to herself. She bowed before him and asked him to teach her how to use nature energy. Issei hesitated and told her he had not mastered nature energy himself. She looked downcast at the response, and seeing the usually composed expressions so sad made him regret his hesitation. He reconsidered and agreed to teach her. Her small smile when he consented made the decision feel worth it. It was the 7th night of their trip. Days passed in a steady routine of training and conversation. Issei practiced magic with Asia and Akino, though he still struggled. He felt his efforts were doomed to fail. He practiced swordplay with Kiba, who was becoming faster thanks to a grueling regimen of running with stones tied to his bare feet to build speed and stamina. He talked with Rias whenever he could. Asia improved by leaps and bounds, quickly mastering fire, water, and even lightning. Rias praised her natural aptitude. Kiba continued to refine his prodigious blade skills. Rias and Akino trained together as well, sparring with both physical and magical techniques and inventing new ways to combine destruction and lightning. Rias worked to make her magic respond to her will, shaping it into forms useful in combat, while Akino experimented with infusing her strikes with elements like ice and fire. If they mastered those techniques, it would be a sight to behold. Kaneko, Issei's current student, learned with quiet diligence. She completed exercises with natural talent, but Issei, since she was still holding back, prevented from reaching her full potential by something he could not yet identify. Those were thoughts for another time. For now he needed rest. He rose from the bed he shared with Kiba and went downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water. He left the kitchen and found Rias sitting on the living room windowsill, watching him with a curious expression. She smiled and invited him to sit with her because she wanted to talk. Issei sat across from her and then noticed that she was wearing glasses. He asked why she had glasses and made a teasing remark about devils supposedly having perfect eyesight. Rias touched the eyepiece and explained that they were only for looks and helped her think more clearly. She gestured to a small stack of books beside her and said they contained information on the Phoenix family. Rias described how, long ago, humans revered the mythical phoenix as a creature that governed life. Legends said the phoenix's tears could heal any wound and that drinking its blood gave eternal youth. The Phoenix family, the same name carried into demon society, were more than legend. Issei recounted that the family included a great Marquis of Hell who once commanded a legion of 20 demons, a fact he had learned from a demon compendium he had read. Rias acknowledged he was correct and continued, explaining that the Phoenix clan possessed the power of the phoenix, mastery over fire of extraordinary potency and, by reputation, an ability to consume even a person's very essence. The real danger, she said, was their immortality, the ability to regenerate from damage. Issei reflected that no enemy was truly invincible. Every being, from human to god, had a weakness, and success was a matter of finding and exploiting it. Rias watched him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Issei's calm conviction continued to impress her. Rias then turned the conversation to the Phoenix household's record in the rating games. An impressive 8, she explained that the 2 losses had been intentional, offered as gifts to allied households, and that she felt uneasy when she learned she was to become the fiancée of Riser. She suspected her parents had arranged the match so that she would have no choice other than to marry him should she ever challenge him in a rating game. The arrangement felt cruel to her. When Issei asked why she seemed so opposed to the idea of marriage, Rias explained that, as a Gremory and the heir of her clan, she always carried that name. She said she was proud to be Gremory, but resentful of being seen only as the heir. She had come to the human world to be seen as herself rather than as a title. In the underworld she had never felt that people looked at her as Rias. They only saw Rias of the Gremory clan. She did not want to marry Riser because she was certain such a union would take away the independence she had found in the human world. She wanted someone who would see her for who she was, not for her family or her status. Rias admitted that her greatest dream was to be loved for who she was, not for her title as a Gremory. She wanted someone who would care for Rias the person. Issei considered her words for a moment and then spoke honestly about his reasons for being there. He explained that he was fighting for her because he had seen her in the clubroom, frustrated, and he wanted to give her the chance to live freely and choose her own future. He wanted her to be able to enjoy life and smile without constant worry. He confessed that he knew little about the underworld or its hierarchy, but his only desire was to help her achieve her dreams. Rias listened in wonder as Issei continued. He said he liked Bucho simply as Bucho and that he wanted her to be herself. He smiled and scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. When he finally noticed her flaming red cheeks, he panicked, waved his arms, and apologized awkwardly, blaming his limited experience with ordinary social interactions. Rias shook her head, her hair bouncing, and Issei's awkwardness faded as he promised to do his best to make sure she would not be forced into an unwanted marriage. His eyes glowed faintly orange with determination. Rias rose from the windowsill and walked over to him. She hugged her pawn, happiness evident in her posture, and thanked Issei sincerely for his support. Issei stood in front of Kaneko, who sat cross-legged in the same clearing they had used the day before. Kaneko had taken his words to heart and was waiting for him to begin. Issei asked Kaneko if she was a cat spirit. Kaneko nodded hesitantly. Issei continued, unaware of the conflict within his junior. He explained that, as a supernatural being, she would be more in tune with nature than others and asked if she had ever received formal training in sage techniques. Kaneko shook her head. Issei described that using sage techniques required gathering natural energy and mixing it with one's life force, and then asked if she could do that. Kaneko closed her eyes and began to gather the required energy, slowly aligning herself with the natural world. The clearing remained quiet except for rustling leaves and the steady trickle of the nearby pond. After a few minutes, Issei told her to stop. Kaneko opened her eyes and addressed him as her senior. He said that her effort should be enough and produced a small mirror, placing it before her. In her concentration she had not noticed the change she underwent. Although she still wore the Kuo Academy uniform, she had shifted into her spirit form. White cat ears, matching tails, and feline eyes made it clear she was a cat spirit. Her appearance reflected the shift into her supernatural nature. Issei asked her to come closer. She walked toward him, puzzled. He asked if she knew how to use her life aura and explained the principle of surrounding the body with life energy to increase strength, speed, and defense. Kaneko shook her head. Issei noted that life aura techniques were harder to teach because they were instinctual, but as a cat spirit she was more connected to nature and likely to grasp it. It warned her it would be difficult and asked if she wanted to proceed. Kaneko nodded resolutely. Later, Issei gently placed Kaneko on the bed in her room. It had been an exhausting day for her. He reflected that manipulating life aura required precise control and interaction with one's own life force, which was not easy, but she had been willing and she was a spirit, so he believed she could learn enough for the upcoming rating game. As he turned to leave, Kaneko grabbed his sleeve. He saw her curled like a cat on the bed, murmuring for her older sister in her sleep. Issei eased her hand away, adjusted her pillow, and tucked the blanket around her. He wished her good night softly as he left the room. On the 10th day of the training trip, Issei sat alone in his room, staring at the gauntlet on his hand, the green jewel set behind it and the Roman numeral 3 displayed across the face. He instructed Drake to remove the first seal. The first mark vanished, leaving only a 2. He drew a steady breath, gathered natural energy, and entered his awakened mode. A small, sharp twinge of discomfort touched his chest, noticeable but not overwhelming. He sighed and dismissed both forms. Drake reminded him that removing the seal would not greatly affect his performance and questioned why Issei had unsealed the boosted gear after promising not to use its power. Issei answered that their opponent was a phoenix and that, even for him, immortality could present a problem. Drake acknowledged Issei's preparedness, and Issei replied that he would not survive otherwise. A knock came at the door. Issei opened it to find Kaneko waiting. She told him she had completed all the exercises. Issei asked her to demonstrate. The white-haired girl nodded and took a stance. Gradually, a green glow of energy spread around her, her life aura concentrating and cloaking her body. Kaneko asked if it was acceptable. Issei observed that it was far from perfect and wondered if something was still holding her back, but it exceeded anything he had managed himself. He thought it was a strong first attempt. He patted her on the head, and Kaneko looked content. On the 14th day, everyone was at their respective homes. Rias had given the final day off to make sure her peerage was well rested. At 10 o'clock that night, Issei lay down on his bed. The raiding game was set to start at midnight. Rias had asked her peerage to meet in the clubroom at 11:30 and had requested that they wear the Kuo Academy uniform because they were members of the Occult Research Club. A knock sounded at the door and Asia opened it shyly, dressed in the nun outfit Issei had first seen her in, without the rosary or veil. Asia explained that Rias had told her to wear whatever made her comfortable, and that even though she had become a devil she still held on to her beliefs. Issei complimented her appearance and Asia stepped forward to sit beside him on the bed. Asia admitted she was scared and leaned her head on his shoulder. Issei wrapped an arm around her and reassured her that he would protect her. Asia sighed and settled closer, asking if they could stay like that until they left. Issei smiled and agreed. The whole club gathered in the old school building with about 10 minutes to midnight. Kiba leaned against a wall, checking his swords while wearing gauntlets and shin guards. Kaneko sat on the couch reading, wearing fingerless gloves used by martial artists that Issei sensed were designed to absorb natural energy. Aquino and Rias sat cross-legged, calmly sipping the tea the queen had prepared. Asia fidgeted in front of them. Issei stared at his gloved hand, the Roman numerals 2 on the back of the glove catching the light. A magic circle appeared and the maid Graphia stepped through it. Graphia announced that the match was about to begin and asked if they were ready. After everyone affirmed, she explained the details of the raiding game. She said that when the match began, they would be transported by a magical circle into another dimension created specifically for raiding games. Issei wondered how powerful devils must be to create an entire dimension for that purpose. Graphia went on to say that the two households, the Gremory clan and the Phoenix clan, would be watching the match along with some of their allies. Issei tensed. He was not used to fighting under observation. Graphia added that the Satan would also be watching. Issei was surprised to learn that Rias's older brother would attend. Kiba confirmed that Rias's brother was Surzex Gremory, the Crimson Satan. Aquino explained that Surzex Gremory had been the strongest devil of his generation and had been chosen as one of the leaders of the underworld. Graphia then instructed everyone to gather in the circle. They nodded and followed her directions. Light covered them and transported them to the battlefield. Issei closed his eyes and checked mentally with Drake, who replied that he was ready. When Issei opened his eyes, they glowed with power as they prepared to begin. When the light faded, Issei found himself in the clubroom. He looked out the window and saw the entire school around them, identical to the real Kuo Academy except that the sky was bright like daytime instead of midnight. Issei realized they had been sent to a dimension that replicated their school. Rias made a sound of displeasure and explained that this was typical of their opponent, He had likely designed the battlefield to give her the appearance of an advantage, hoping she would still lose. She declared that she would not give him that satisfaction and vowed that they would win. The others expressed their approval. Grafia introduced herself as a maid of the House of Gremory and the arbiter of the match between Rias Gremory and Riser Phoenix, observing in the name of her master, Surzex Lucifer. With the consent of Riser and Rias, she and others had created this battlefield, a replica of Kuo Academy where Rias attended in the human world. Issei recognized the advantage their familiarity provided. Grafia described that Rias's base would be in the Occult Research Club room in the old school building while Riser's base would be in the Student Council room in the new school building. She added that if a pawn were to promote, it would need to travel to the opposing side's location. Issei noted that they first had to deal with the pawns or risk them promoting into queens, which would become a serious problem. He told Rias he had a plan to handle them. Rias expressed interest in hearing his approach. That exchange marked the beginning of the raiding game. Kuo Academy was built differently from most Japanese schools. The main building featured large glass windows and Greek-style pillars at the entrance. The old school building matched that design except for the lack of pillars. The gymnasium in the middle was a huge structure made to hold the entire student body for school events. The campus was bordered by a dense forest, overgrown trees with only a few cobbled pathways connecting one place to another. In the branches of a tree a few hundred feet from the old school building, Issei crouched, waiting for the pawns he expected to approach along the path. He reasoned that Riser's peerage did not know the grounds as well as Rias did, so they were likely to take the most straightforward route rather than move through the forest, where traps could easily disable them. That assumption was not guaranteed, but Issei expected someone as arrogant as Riser to favor direct confrontation and to give his opponents opportunities to fight back simply to crush them later. The replicated field they had been transported to suggested Riser favored that philosophy, completely overwhelming anyone who stood against him. A tense minute passed until the sound of footsteps on pavement broke the silence. Issei saw 3 of Riser's pawns slowly walking toward the school building, unaware of his presence. Issei smiled to himself, thinking that made things easier. When the 3 were directly below, he dropped from the tree and landed quietly among them. The sudden appearance of a single opponent, even one with the combat weight of several pawns, stunned them into silence. The pawn dressed in a dancer's outfit reacted first and formed a casting circle on her hand. She barely managed to launch the spell before Issei slipped beneath her arm, moved behind her, and delivered a lightning-quick strike that left her unconscious and slumping to the ground. The 2 pawns dressed like maids charged at him with enraged cries. Issei sidestepped easily, knocking the one closest to him to the ground and rendering her unconscious with a simple move. The remaining pawn, furious, formed a large magical circle. She unleashed a torrent of flame that surged toward Issei. Issei met the attack head-on. The fire, which would have overwhelmed a normal human or even a devil, froze under his influence. When the tips of the flames reached him, he shifted his power to take control of them, turning the heat into ice. He shattered the ice and found the last pawn stunned and wide-eyed. With a single precise maneuver, he neutralized her as well. The arena announcer declared that Riser-sama's 3 pawns had retired. Issei frowned and looked at the ground where his 3 opponents had stood moments before. He could have incapacitated them immediately when he dropped down, but he had held back to learn what Riser's pawns could do. He was not impressed. It had been far too easy. Still, 3 members of Riser's peerage were now out of the game. A sudden explosion boomed across the field, drawing his attention upward. The announcer then declared that 2 more of Riser's pawns, plus a knight and a rook, had retired. Issei watched a fading magical circle hang above the smoking ruins of the gymnasium. That had been the plan, to remove the middle ground and make travel between the 2 sides more hazardous. With his destination decided, Issei did not head toward the gym. Instead he charged toward the school grounds, moving closer to the heart of the main school building, the base of Riser Phoenix. Kiba ducked under the blow aimed to cleave off his head, pushing off the ground to gain distance and time to think. The assault against the gym had gone according to plan. Kaneko and he had beaten down 2 pawns, a knight and a rook. At first Kiba had worried about his junior, fearing she might not manage against 3 opponents at once. Then a golden light surrounded her, and within minutes she incapacitated all 3 before Kiba even finished his own opponent, who went by the name Cirrus. Kiba could only shake his head slowly, impressed at how much the rook had improved. The 2 of them walked away from the gym, leaving the 4 inside stunned. That changed when lightning struck the gym and the peerage members within it. Still riding the high of battle, Kiba and Kaneko had become complacent and paid for it. Kiba barely escaped the blast radius by using the speed granted by the knight piece within him. Kaneko, a rook who had been caught off guard and out of her defensive form, was not as lucky and sustained painful injuries. They were preparing to face the Yubeluna, the queen of Riser, when Akino intervened. Akino and the Yubeluna began their duel in mid-flight, the air around them crackling with the sparks of their signature magic. Kiba and Kaneko took that chance to approach Riser's base. Now Kiba crossed blades with Carlomagné, the other knight of the Phoenix. He watched his opponent with wary eyes, analyzing her stance and every movement. Kaneko was struck by one of her 3 opponents, and Kiba felt his teeth grit. He wanted to tend to his junior. When he made a reflexive move to go to her side, Carlomagné blocked his path, locking blades with him and smiling. Kaneko managed to take up a defensive stance again, her armor-like aura returning to cover her body. Carlomagné complimented Kiba, addressing him as the Knight of Gremory. Kiba returned the compliment and explained that he needed to move to help someone in need. Carlomagné refused to yield, teasing that it had been a good try, then engaged him again. Sparks flew as their weapons met. Rias's announcer declared that Riser's rook and Rias's rook had retired. Kiba turned to see Kaneko's body slowly fading into light. Beside her, the 2 pawns were outstretched and panting from exhaustion, but they were grinning in victory. Revel Phoenix, who had not joined the fight, urged Carlomagné to finish her opponent, noting that Ni and Lee had already defeated theirs. Revel looked like a young girl with long blonde hair in twin ponytails, dark blue eyes, and a light purple dress with feather-like extensions at the back. Her wings of fire gave her a bird-like appearance. A companion in a kimono sat beside her and had not left her side during the battle. Revel complained that knight types were always so troublesome with their honor. Carlomagné sighed, then faced Kiba resolutely while her 2-pawn allies circled Rias's only knight. With a deft gesture, all 3 of them were suddenly engulfed in flames. Carlomagné stated that it had been a good fight, but she needed to finish it quickly, promising that a proper duel would happen once they won the match. Kiba backed away and formed another blade, the flame delete, raising it to blunt the incoming heat. Graphia's announcer voice declared that Riser's queen had retired. Everyone in the vicinity reacted with surprise and momentarily lost control of their powers. Kiba's grin widened at the turn of events while members of Riser's peerage remained wide-eyed. Revel quickly recovered and ordered everyone to take down the knight, insisting she wanted the match to end because she planned to question a Yubeluna afterward. The 2 pawns and the knight obeyed and were once more wreathed in fire. Kiba raised his newly created sword and absorbed the flames into it. Riser's peerage demanded to know what he had done and how he had managed that. Kiba explained that his sword devoured flames and suggested that they had been unlucky to face someone like him. Inwardly he knew he was bluffing. His blade could absorb ordinary fire, but he would not be able to fully withstand the power of a phoenix, but he hoped his bravado would make them cautious. For the moment it seemed to work. Revel chastised them for being cautious over such a claim and urged them to press the attack, asserting it was obvious he was bluffing. The 2 pawns advanced with renewed confidence while the knight held back, waiting for an opening. Kiba prepared to bring down as many of them as he could when Graphia announced that Riser's knight had retired. Revel reacted with accusation, pointing at the one responsible for the sudden turn. Standing there with the unconscious knight at his feet was Issei. Issei counted the opponents, 2 bishops, 2 pawns, and a knight, then amended his count and crossed out the knight. He glanced at the body fading into light beneath him. He looked up directly into the other bishop's eyes. She stared at him with a curious intensity. Instead of answering, Issei turned to Kiba and noticed his condition. Issei asked Kiba what had happened and pointed out that he was bleeding. Kiba admitted he had not noticed at first, then touched his side and found a long wound that was bleeding and staining his clothes. Issei observed that the adrenaline of battle often made people unaware of their injuries. Kiba questioned whether it was the right time for such a lesson. Issei acknowledged the point and gathered chakra again, feeling the familiar warmth of flames inside him. He said he wanted to interrupt their fight to take revenge on those who had attacked Kaneko. Kiba told him that the pawns and the rook had been responsible, and that Kaneko had managed to take out the rook by herself, showing remarkable improvement in a week. Issei admitted pride in Kaneko's growth. Their exchange was cut short when Ravel finally lost her patience. Anger flared in her voice as waves of fire and gusting wind swirled around her. She challenged Issei and declared that she would make him remember who she was, identifying herself as Ravel of the Phoenix clan, daughter of fire and wind, and then unleashed a charging wall of fire toward him. Issei sighed and lifted his hands to meet the attack. The flames did not touch him. Instead, they seemed to be absorbed into him, vanishing into the air. People around them reacted with astonished faces, and Ravel stared in shock. Issei asked Kiba to hold on for a few minutes while he dealt with Ravel. Kiba agreed and asked where Akino was. Issei replied that Akino was with Bucho and Asia, helping them against Riser. He then turned back to the stunned Phoenix and ran toward her. A fellow bishop with black hair and a purple kimono stepped in front of Ravel and urged her to get behind her, trying to shield her from an approaching pawn. The defense proved as ineffective as paper against an arrow. Issei closed the distance in seconds, dodging under the bishop's magic circle. He moved in and delivered quick, precise strikes that caused the opposing bishop to collapse, unconscious. Ravel watched, her expression revealing a mix of shock and dismay. Ravel attempted to retaliate, but Issei grabbed her arm and held her fast. He promised to explain later and, with a deft movement, rendered Ravel unconscious as well. The system announced that Riser's 2 bishops had retired. Issei commented that the outcome felt anticlimactic as the defeated bodies faded into white light and were sent to the medical ward in the underworld. Kiba was finishing his own fights at the same time. With a final strike using his flame delete, Kiba defeated the blue-haired catgirl, and the system recorded that Riser's 2 pawns had retired. Kiba gave Issei a measuring look and asked how he had known the girl. Issei rubbed the back of his neck and admitted it was a long story. Kiba observed that Issei was an interesting person and said he felt fortunate to have met him. Issei, a little embarrassed, mentioned that he was usually attracted to girls. Kiba replied calmly that he cared about people regardless of gender and valued them for who they were. The announcement came next. Rias's queen had retired. Issei and Kiba snapped to attention, their gazes locking onto the roof of the main school building where pillars of fire and blasts of dark energy erupted. Exchanging a quick look, they sprinted toward the disturbance at top speed, determined to help their president. Rias panted, glaring angrily at Riser Phoenix. They had been fighting on the rooftop for half an hour. Akino had come to back her up 15 minutes earlier, and Riser's queen, Ubeluna, had arrived at the same time. They had exchanged magic flames, lightning, explosive bursts, and spheres of destructive energy. Ironically, Riser had lost his queen when she reached for her bottle of Phoenix Tears, leaving her exposed long enough for Rias to form a magical circle beneath her and blast her away, putting her out of commission. Rias and Akino had given everything they had, using creative spells, but Riser had shown the Phoenix resilience and a kind of immortality. Akino had been defeated after charging in a rage to protect Asia. Riser had dodged and used wings of flame to encase her in a ball of fire. She now lay incapacitated, exhausted from the effort, but Rias had managed to gain something from their struggle. Riser looked ragged, breathing harshly, hair unkempt, face slick with sweat, and visibly angry. Riser declared that this was madness, that it was pointless to continue, that everyone had foreseen the outcome, and he urged Rias to give up and marry him, promising to give her a life she could not imagine. His grin made his inappropriate intentions clear. He had expected an easy victory that would let him defeat her peerage, consolidate power, and gain status among the devils. He had not expected his opponent to take so much, to lose few members, and to fight him to a near standstill despite her inexperience. Rias's anger flared at his words. She bared her teeth at him while Asia trembled beside her, terrified of the phoenix. Rias insisted she would not give up, reminded him she was still in the game, pointed out the pieces he had lost and the fatigue he was showing, and insisted the game was far from over. Riser's nerves began to fray. He decided to end it and summoned a massive fireball above his head, its heat washing across the rooftop toward Rias. He hurled the enormous ball, and the tiles began to melt where its heat passed. Rias cursed inwardly. The size of the blast meant she could not simply dodge it. Asia, right behind her, would be too slow. She could not carry Asia and outrun the fireball, and if she countered directly she risked depleting her energy. Gritting her teeth, she ran to her only bishop in the game and hoped for the best. Her hope was answered when warm arms suddenly wrapped around her and tucked her into a protective hold, carrying her away from the incoming fireball. When she looked up, bright orange eyes gazed down and a playful smile softened the moment. Issei had arrived and greeted her playfully, addressing her as president. Rias, breathless and surprised, recognized him and stammered his name. Issei set Rias down after checking that she was all right. He turned to Kiba and saw the knight carefully setting Asia down as well. Kiba approached Rias with a teasing smile and eyes bright with amusement. Rias nodded and turned toward the phoenix. One look told her he was furious, the winds whipped around him, and his fiery wings danced wildly. He looked far less composed than in the clubroom, his clothes rumpled, hair messy, and his breathing a little ragged. The others had clearly taken a toll on him. Without warning, the phoenix charged the group in a swirling tempest of fire and wind, interrupting the moment. Rias moved as if to intervene, but Issei gently held her back and reassured her that she had done more than enough, urging her to let her pawn handle the situation. Issei faced the approaching storm and invoked his resolve, declaring himself unburnt, unbent, unbroken. Flames burst from his gauntlets and met the phoenix's fire in a towering pillar. The phoenix leapt through it, his flames following his will. Issei caught the phoenix's fist midair and threw him back toward his original position. Seizing the opening, Issei pressed the attack, launching at the phoenix and landing a rapid series of strikes the other barely saw. The phoenix retaliated by striking with his wings. Issei instinctively pulled back as his opponent took to the air to buy time. From above, the phoenix taunted Issei, boasting that phoenix were hunters in the air. Issei only aimed both palms at the ground, letting power build until a sudden blast of energy propelled him through the air and into the phoenix. The surprised phoenix ducked under a calculated kick, and Issei landed on his back. He gripped the fiery wings despite the heat, freezing their bases and denying them their power. Then Issei drove his heel down, and the phoenix's wings were forcefully blasted away, sending him crashing to the earth and leaving a crater where he struck. The fire in Issei's hands faded as he landed and watched the fallen opponent. The phoenix struggled to rise from the crater, visibly shaken. He asked Issei, with genuine curiosity, why he would fight for Rias when he had been an ordinary human only weeks before, with no debts or obligations to bind him to another. Why choose to become another's pawn to face an immortal phoenix? Issei stared back and explained that he wanted to help Rias, to give her the freedom she deserved so she could speak her mind and love whom she chose. He asserted that she was a good person and that she was his master now, conceding sheepishly that it sounded cheesy when he committed himself to obeying her orders. Unknown to Issei, Rias had been on the grounds and had heard his words. She clutched at her chest, cheeks flushed, and admitted to herself that Issei's confession was making her heart flutter. Rias snapped her head toward the rooftop where she had left 2 members of her peerage, only to find someone else there instead. A young girl with bright blue hair tied into 4 ponytails wore a white haori and a red sash, holding a wooden staff pointed in Rias's direction as she quickly approached. Issei instantly went on alert, cursing himself for his moment of carelessness. He should have known better. He was a warrior, not a novice, and he reminded himself never to drop his guard on a battlefield where everything could change in an instant. He immediately searched for his king, the most important piece in a raiding game. He saw the blue-haired girl rushing toward Rias. He cursed and ran, putting every ounce of speed he had into it. Issei reached Rias's side just in time to see Rias raise her arms and weave her signature black and crimson magic. The attack rushed toward the pawn, and the pawn ducked beneath it with a speed and grace that seemed almost otherworldly. That evasive move, however, bought Issei enough time to get between Rias and the last two opponents. Issei checked on President Rias, eyes flicking between the remaining adversaries. Riser Phoenix laughed and praised Mira for her effort, promising a later reward. Mira blushed, clearly flattered and pleased by the praise. Issei tensed and stepped back to form a defensive triangle, keeping Rias safely behind him. Riser calmly suggested that it was time to finish the match. He gestured to Mira, and simultaneously both opponents formed magical circles in front of them. Issei sensed that the amount of energy concentrated there was enormous, far more than he could safely absorb into his limited pool. Turning it into ice risked triggering an even greater fire reaction, and he had no intention of gambling with Rias's future. He made the choice that would decide the game. The two phoenixes unleashed their magic, sending twin 20-foot waves of fire rushing toward Issei and his king. Issei responded by calling to Drake, unsealing its power and drawing on every last reserve. Issei met the flames head-on, his palms extended. The two waves clashed in a torrent of heat and light, forming a towering pillar where fire met fire. Smoke and ash swirled, and when the haze cleared, the battlefield had changed completely. Everything within a 20-foot radius was covered in frost. The air itself felt cold and sharp. Riser and Mira felt the chill bite at them. In the center of the frozen circle, Issei stood with his arms still outstretched. The jewels set on the backs of his gloves had shifted one numeral gone, leaving a mark of 2 where there had been 3. A strange, blue-tinged flame burned across his forehead and hands, a fire that acted like fire without, indiscriminately consuming anything it did not command. Riser felt an unfamiliar chill run down his spine as he took in the sight, and Mira mirrored his unease. If Riser had been looking elsewhere, he would have missed the small motion of Issei's legs and the slight twitch of his arms. Riser's pawn retired. The match was effectively over. Riser thought with sardonic amusement that whatever Issei had done, it had been devastatingly effective. He asked if Issei had anything to say. Issei's gaze fixed on him, and Riser felt a rare moment of discomfort under that steady look. He acknowledged the beauty of Issei's flames, odd that such a fire could rival a phoenix's own. Undeterred, Riser summoned his phoenix wings of flame and ran forward with a small, almost imperceptible smile, prepared for the inevitable clash. Before the collision could escalate, the game announced that Riser Phoenix's king had retired and that Rias Gremory was the winner. Issei exhaled and lowered his arms, staring where Riser had stood. President Rias called Issei by name, and he turned to smile at his leader. Light enveloped them both, and when it faded they found themselves in a rather large room. Grafia the maid stood waiting, accompanied by 2 red-haired men who bore a family resemblance to Rias. Rias's father rushed forward in relief and affection, embracing Rias tightly while exclaiming how frightened he had been. Rias protested and squirmed, cheeks reddening as she tried to free herself. Her father continued to cry with relief. The older redhead, Surzex Lucifer, embraced his sister and became emotional as well, his voice thick with pride. Grafia, the most composed in the room, dragged the protesting Surzex by the ear until he protested that it hurt. Issei observed, surprised at how different these powerful figures were from the fearsome images he had imagined. He noted silently that his preconceptions about devils and the underworld were being challenged. Grafia told them both to stop, reminding them that their behavior was undignified. The two immediately fell silent. Surzex suggested that Rias would want to see her peerage members and steered the conversation back on track. Rias glanced at Issei from the corner of her eye and nodded quickly, eager to move past the embarrassing moment. When Grafia opened the door, a shout echoed down the hallway and a red blur barreled into the doorway, tackled Issei, and nearly knocked him over. Issei staggered under the impact, blinked to clear his vision, and looked down to see a happy face beaming up at him. The child was short with crimson hair and matching eyes, wearing a white shirt with thin black vertical stripes, a dark gray blazer, and a long black overcoat fastened with a red ribbon. Recognition dawned on Issei. He had met the boy years earlier while traveling. Milikas rushed in and called out that Issei was his big brother, then rubbed his head against Issei's stomach with an affectionate motion. Issei managed a surprised laugh and awkwardly corrected him, explaining that his name was Issei Hyoudou. Grafia asked with clear surprise whether Issei knew the boy. Milikas answered plainly that the young man was his big brother, which made Issei facepalm inwardly at the innocence of it all. He offered his name again, and then, curious, asked Milikas if he had ever mentioned being a member of the Gremory family. Surzex took the moment in stride and laughed. He teased that he should be disappointed in his son for not properly introducing himself, then introduced himself more formally as Surzex. Milikas bowed with noble grace and announced that he was Milikas Gremory and asked Issei to take care of him. Embarrassed, Issei returned the bow in a manner made clumsy by the contrast in customs. Grafia asked Milikas to introduce his big brother properly. Milikas took Issei's hand, told Issei that the tall man was his father Surzex and that the woman was his mother Grafia, and beamed with pride. Issei reacted with surprise and a quick question about Grafia being Milikas's mother. Realization followed when he recognized Surzex as one of the 4 great rulers of the underworld. The clues: the crimson hair they'd only seen on Rias, the family resemblance, and Surzex's own appearance fell into place, and Issei sighed at how obvious it had been in hindsight. Surzex laughed again and admitted he liked Issei, noting that Issei was refreshingly different from other devils who might have tried to ingratiate themselves. Issei smiled back and dryly observed that speaking casually to powerful beings sometimes left them too surprised to act hostile. Rias reminded everyone that they were on their way to the hospital to visit her peerage, bringing the group back to their purpose. Issei rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment and agreed to head that way. Milikas enthusiastically declared that he would show Issei the way, took his hand, and began to escort him through the unfamiliar corridors toward the hospital where Rias's peers were receiving medical attention. Grafia, inspecting Issei more closely, suggested that Milikas could play with his big brother later and that he had responsibilities for now. Despite her growing curiosity about the enigmatic teen she wanted to learn how he knew her son, Grafia decided this was not the time for questions. She picked up her pouting son and left the room for other matters, Milikas waving a quick goodbye. Rias watched the exchange with a faint twinge of envy and flushed when Surzex chuckled at her reaction. He teased his sister about how quickly she had become attached to Issei and wondered aloud if this was an example of someone who acted aloof but warmed up quickly. Rias protested that it was not like that, she merely felt indebted because Issei had helped her in a difficult situation. With an annoyed huff, she followed Issei toward the hospital. Surzex, amused, followed his father, who had decided to meet the head of the Phoenix clan to smooth relations between their families. Issei stepped into the room a little behind Rias. The space was large enough for 10 hospital beds, 5 on each side, with room for a dozen people to move around comfortably. 4 of Rias's peerage members occupied beds, Kiba and Kaneko on the left, with Kaneko closest to the door, Aquino and Asia on the right, and the queen resting on the bed farthest from them. When Rias entered with Issei following close behind, still holding Milikas's hand, everyone immediately sat up and brightened at the sight of their president. They all called out to Rias in relief. Rias raised a hand to stop them and told them not to get up, explaining that they had been hurt for her sake and deserved to rest. Her calm words eased their tension and they relaxed back onto their beds. Kiba demanded to know what had happened, admitting that he had only just woken and was angry at himself for letting his guard down. Asia confessed that, despite being told to stand beside Rias, she had been taken out of the fight and felt she had contributed nothing. Rias stepped forward and embraced Asia, surprising her, and reminded her that every one of them had helped more than they realized and that their willingness to fight for her was one of the greatest comforts she could ask for. Smiles returned to the wounded faces as relief washed over them. Kiba then mentioned that the girl named Ravel had seemed to know Issei, which drew everyone's attention. Issei tried to answer as best he could and denied anything definitive, noting that it was complicated. Aquino pointed out that Ravel had called him Haruka back in the clubroom and asked what that meant. Issei, trying to change the subject, asked Kaneko about her first use of the sage arts in battle and whether she was experiencing any side effects, saying he would feel guilty if his training had harmed her. The cat demon Kaneko narrowed her eyes and accused him of being suspicious. Asia, eager for answers, insisted that she also wanted to know. Rias, chin in hand, admitted she was curious too and watched the now fidgeting pawn closely. Issei found himself the center of attention as everyone looked to him for an explanation. He opened his mouth to speak when the door slammed open and a voice demanded an explanation. Someone warned that confronting the newcomer might not be wise. Issei turned around with a weary resignation, a small smile at the corners of his mouth, and faced the newcomer. The blonde girl with twin drills and a frilly pink dress was almost exactly like the one he had met 2 years earlier. Issei addressed her as Little Bird. Ravel scowled, pointed at him, and flushed. The girl standing with her, whom Issei vaguely remembered knocking out, appeared healed and stood with an unburdened posture. Ravel continued to insist on an explanation, her anger obvious. Milady's companion looked surprised by the exchange. Issei scratched the back of his head awkwardly and admitted that explaining it properly was difficult. Rias and the others stared, waiting. Issei sighed and began to explain that the devils she had met were not the first devils he had encountered, and that 2 years ago he had been in the underworld where he had met that girl. He offered a brief summary and then, seeing they were pressing him for details, acknowledged that it was not an entertaining story but agreed to tell it later. The group's insistence convinced him otherwise, and he finally sighed and started to recount his past, getting lost in his memories. Issei walked through the cobbled streets of the town, peering through shop windows at their displays. The underworld was nothing like he had expected. It had food stands, jewelry shops, and even stores selling television sets that showed programs resembling magical girl shows. Overall, it felt more like the human world than the ominous place he had imagined. He reminded himself not to relax completely. This was still the underworld. For one thing, people here sometimes had wings and tails. Still, Issei admitted that he felt unusually at ease in the capital of the underworld, more relaxed than he had been anywhere else recently. Drake, the dragon within him, observed that the place was pleasant, and then teased that Issei's conscience would never let a cry for help go unanswered. Issei mentally told Drake to be quiet and kept taking in the sights. He stopped to look at a toy in a window, a small green plush with a tentacle beard, and sighed when he realized he didn't have enough money to buy it. Then he headed toward the outskirts of town, where he had been told he could find the artifact he sought. Near the edge of town, where buildings met the forest, a shout broke the calm. Issei froze. The call for help sounded suspiciously like a trap. Drake pointed out how cliché it was, but Issei's conscience would not let him ignore it. He ran toward the sound as it echoed deeper into the woods. A short distance into the forest, in a small clearing, Issei found a scene that confirmed his fears. A girl who looked no older than 12 was being manhandled by 3 hooded figures while several others were bound on a cart nearby. One of the bound people stood out by the color of his clothes and the sword strapped to his back. The girl, blonde and dressed in an ornate pink dress, trembled with fear. One captor clamped a hand over her face to silence her and complained about kidnappings, arguing with his companions about why they had to do this. The tallest man explained that devils fetched high prices in the human world, and this girl, identified as a phoenix, was supposedly worth even more. He suggested they could make a profit, and the others debated whether they would get paid. Issei moved quietly, putting into practice everything he had been taught. He slipped close enough to lift a knife from the belt of one assailant without being seen. He announced his presence with a simple movement, and the tall man snapped around to strike at him. Issei sidestepped the blow, grabbed the man's arm, and used his momentum against him. With a precise motion and the hilt of the stolen knife, Issei struck the tall man's temple, sending him collapsing to the ground, unconscious but unharmed in a non-graphic way. The shorter assailant reacted with a yell and rushed Issei with a dagger. Issei avoided the charge, stepped to the side, and performed a swift counter that caught the attacker off balance. The man flipped through the air and hit the ground hard, rendered unconscious by the impact. Issei then checked that both men were breathing and stable. Only the leader remained. He had propped the frightened girl against a tree and watched Issei's quick work with cool appraisal. He raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture to indicate he was not immediately hostile. The leader observed that Issei was quick and strong for someone his age and then explained his plan to sell the girl, emphasizing that Phoenix Devils could bring a high price. He proposed a partnership, suggesting they could both profit from Issei's skills and his own connections. Issei refused the offer immediately. A brief pause followed as the forest settled around them, and the girl remained silent and shaken. Issei moved to ensure she was out of immediate danger and to secure the area. The leader, seeing his plan fail, retreated with his remaining men when it became clear they could not win the confrontation. Issei stayed with the girl until help arrived and then continued toward the edge of town, determined to find the artifact he had come for. John announced that he would beat the other up, free the girl behind him, and be on his way. Haruka told the voice drag to go away and said he was busy. John found that response disappointing and decided he would have to take Haruka down. Without further preamble, he drew his sword and attacked, intending to finish the boy before he could react. He had underestimated how skilled the boy truly was. Haruka slipped under the blow and brought up his knife to aim for John's shoulder blades. Their blades met knife against sword, neither yielding. When John overextended slightly, leaving a small opening, Haruka moved to stab the taller man in the shoulder. John managed to dodge. The knife grazed him as John used the opening to swing his sword toward Haruka's back. Sensing danger, Haruka rolled forward and the blade whistled harmlessly overhead. His feet skimmed the ground, leaving 2 furrows where he landed. Without hesitation, he launched himself back at John. John observed him calmly, impressed by the boy's control. He pushed against Haruka's knife and leapt back a few feet. John introduced himself with a sincere bow and said his name was John. Haruka lowered his arms, puzzled, and John prompted him to return the courtesy. After a moment of distant thought, Haruka finally gave his name. John acknowledged him and prepared for another bout. Haruka raised the dagger and rushed forward. Immediately they were locked in a rhythm that left thought behind and let instinct take over. Sparks flew as their weapons met again and again in clean, fast clashes, like a choreographed duel from an animated tale. During a close struggle where they pushed face to face, John noticed a grin in Haruka's eyes, pure enjoyment of the fight. That realization surprised John. He could not recall the last time he had fought for pleasure rather than for orders or coin. The brief shock loosened his grip. Haruka seized the moment. He used his knife to nudge John's sword tip down into the earth and kicked John in the chest, sending him to his knees. Haruka stepped forward and, shielding the blade with his body, pointed the knife and asked John to yield. John chuckled, pulled down his mask and hood, and accepted. He revealed a man with curly brown hair to his shoulders, a scar running from his right eye to his cheek, and dark gray eyes that seemed almost black. John told Haruka that he was a very unusual person and then, surprisingly, stood and turned his back on the knife. Haruka asked if John was leaving. John confirmed that he was. When Haruka pointed to the stillbound girl and asked about her, John reminded him that Haruka had promised to free her and urged him to do so. John explained that the encounter had made him reflect on what mattered to a man and that he needed time to collect his thoughts. He tossed his scabbard to Haruka as a keepsake and walked away over the horizon. Haruka watched him go, then sheathed the sword he had left and approached the captive. He removed her GG and checked that she was conscious and unharmed. She appeared shaken from captivity and wore dirty, worn clothing that had clearly seen better days. Her features suggested noble birth. When Haruka examined the metal cuffs on her wrists and ankles, gauntlet-like bands from elbow to wrist, his eyes narrowed at the engraving. The cuffs bore an Ouroboros encircling a triangle with a sun at its center. The symbol was familiar. If the Ouroboros was any guide, it connected to the Cow's Brigade. That association disturbed Haruka. The girl's trembling grew more pronounced as his gaze lingered. The cuffs themselves were unique. The metal used in its construction could suppress the magic contained within, and from the sensation it gave him he realized it had been specially treated to be stronger against devils, probably by a blessing or similar enchantment. The girl stammered a meek thank you and held out her hands, asking him to remove it. Haruka said he could and told her to hold still while he drew a knife under the leather straps and cut them free. He thought it was ironic that all the effort to keep her harmless had been undone by a simple knife. He asked if she could walk as she rubbed her feet. She tried to stand but faltered and would have fallen if not for Haruka catching her. She said she could not walk. Haruka turned, offered his back, and told her to hop on. Hesitantly, the girl, a phoenix if the others had been correct, clambered onto his back and wrapped her arms around his neck. Haruka admitted that he did not know where to bring her and asked where she was from. She mumbled that her family was staying in town at a hotel. 2 years earlier, Haruka and Ravel traveled the pathways, drawing many odd looks as they went. Along the way, they talked mostly about Ravel herself, her family, her friends, what her life was like, and what the underworld was like. After a couple of hours of conversation, they arrived near the center of the city. Ravel announced that this was the place and stepped down reluctantly from Haruka's back. Haruka asked if she was sure and called her Little Bird, a nickname she flushed at because it had been given to her by her savior when she became attached to the bird plushie she carried. Ravel affirmed she was sure, feeling a little more confident speaking to the stranger who had helped her. She walked to the door, somehow looking elegant despite being dirty and dressed in rags. When she reached the middle of the lobby, a flash of burgundy heralded her family's arrival. Their mother rushed forward, nearly hysterical, holding her daughter close and thanking the fates for finding her. Behind her, Ravel's 3 brothers showed visible relief at seeing their sister. Riser, concerned, asked if Ravel was all right and what had happened to her. Everyone waited for her answer. Ravel explained that she had been kidnapped while walking down the street. Anger flared through the family at that news, and a faint, tense heat seemed to rise as flames flickered into being around them in their outrage, prompting some occupants of the lobby to leave hastily. Their mother, eyes hard with fury, swore she would burn those responsible to the ground if she learned their names. Ravel, the eldest, managed to stay calm enough to ask how Ravel had escaped. Ravel recalled being in the forest and being saved by someone who had come at exactly the right moment, just like in the stories. She turned to introduce her savior, calling for Haruka, only to find empty air where she had expected him to stand. She looked everywhere, as if he might be hiding behind a couch or a plant. Ravel stepped out of the building with her family following, all wearing baffled expressions. One brother wondered whether Ravel might have imagined the rescue, but Ravel, amused and curious, expressed his desire to meet the one who had saved his sister. Ravel stamped her foot in frustration, insisting he had been there. Their mother cradled Ravel, kissed the top of her head, and said she would like to thank him if he truly existed. Perched on the roof of a nearby building, a boy watched as Ravel reunited with her family. He observed their anger and the fierce promises they made on her behalf, their laughter as the mood lightened, and their father's tears of relief at seeing his daughter safe and relatively unharmed. He watched them smile, play, and comfort one another. Deep down, in the boy who would one day become Issei Hyoudou, he wondered whether this was what it was like to have a family. Present day. Issei sighed and leaned against the wall with his eyes closed, admitting to himself that he had edited much of what he had told them but kept the essentials. A hush followed his story, everyone listened in surprise, even Ravel, who had been there at the time. Only one person broke the silence. Lord Rayleigh Phoenix identified Issei as the one who had rescued his daughter. Issei nearly jumped and slammed his toe on a bedpost, swearing as he hopped and clutched his foot while turning to face the speaker. Rayleigh was taller than Issei, dressed in a crisp white shirt, a tailored black jacket, and straight black pants. His blonde hair and rugged features echoed the family resemblance to Ravel and Riser. He inspected Issei, nodded, and confirmed that Issei was the person Ravel had spoken about over the years. Ravel cried out in surprise and embarrassment, calling out to her father. The others reacted with a mixture of stunned and amused expressions. Rayleigh's tone shifted, and he thanked Issei sincerely for saving his daughter when no one else had done so, for returning her without expectation of reward. He bowed to Issei, identifying himself as one of the Phoenix house heads, and expressed his deep gratitude. Ravel asked her father a tentative question in response. Issei thought that Ravel had said a lot in the past few minutes and struggled for words. He explained that he did not want a reward, when he heard her cry, he had simply helped. He said he had not thought about recognition, he had seen someone helpless and afraid, and anyone in that situation would have done the same. Rayleigh stared directly into Issei's eyes and declared that he was a good man, calling him Issei Hyoudou by name. Surzex laughed and remarked that Rayleigh seemed fond of Issei. Issei, still distracted, accidentally hit his other toe and muttered under his breath, hopping like a startled rabbit as Surzex chuckled. Surzex praised Issei as honest, caring, and strong, noting that defeating Riser had demonstrated his strength. Rayleigh then asked Issei how he felt about marrying Ravel. The question knocked Issei off his feet and he fell flat on his face. Rias reacted with an instinctive protest before realizing whom she was addressing and covering her mouth. The others voiced a range of reactions. Some were scandalized, one wondered if Issei was making a move so quickly, another offered heartfelt congratulations, and one teased him about his reputation for moving fast. Ravel, blushing and trailing off in whispers, admitted that marriage was moving too quickly for her and that she was not yet ready, explaining that she remained under her older brother's household obligations. Rayleigh looked at Issei expectantly, and Issei felt like an animal on display. He stammered that it might be unwise given that Ravel's brother had only just broken free from an arranged marriage, suggesting the timing could be poor. Rayleigh smiled knowingly and indicated quietly that this was not a refusal. Issei awkwardly tried to speak about Ravel's qualities but stumbled over his words. Rayleigh patted him on the shoulder, then left the room with Ravel and Maihi following him. Issei turned to Surzex, who wore a smug grin. Rias asked if this was what he had meant when he said he had met other devils before, and Issei sheepishly confirmed it. Rias nodded, folding her arms. Surzex commented that Issei's connections were surprising, and Issei replied that he had only helped someone in need, wondering aloud whether that was such a big deal. The group chuckled in response. Issei left the conversation with the uneasy feeling that the matter was far from over. Issei felt certain he had been right. Rias bowed low and explained her family's situation to Issei's parents, asking father and mother to allow her to stay in the Hyoudou household with Issei. Issei sat on the living room couch between his parents while Asia gently nudged his arm. A pile of luggage sat in the corner. Issei's father greeted Rias warmly and laughed that their home would gladly take her in, teasing about how Issei kept finding women who wanted to stay with him. Issei's mother smiled and said she would have 2 daughters now, bringing her hands to her cheeks. Issei's father placed a hand on his son's shoulder and, with a solemn but amused look, told Issei that if he continued like this he might accomplish the dream he had when he was young to have his own harem. Issei was taken aback, then, overcome with awe, vowed passionately that he would live out his father's dream. Rias then mentioned she had obtained permission to stay from his parents and asked Issei to help with her luggage. Issei agreed, and Rias said she would freshen up, leaving Issei momentarily flustered. Asia, teary-eyed but determined, insisted she should not be left out and declared she would join in whatever the others were doing, refusing to lose to the club president. Sparks of competitive energy flared between Rias and Asia, and Issei could only think that his life was indeed getting livelier. Drake chuckled in agreement. A memory surfaced in Issei's mind. A boy who had once been asked by an anguished old man to climb to the temple atop a cliff and retrieve a treasure. The old man had no riches to offer, only gratitude, and the boy had agreed. A sphinx blocked the path, circling like a wary guardian and demanding answers before allowing passage. Despite the hunger in its gaze, the boy could not help but notice the creature's striking presence. It was large, with deep golden fur and eagle wings tucked close to its body. Its face was androgynous and its gray eyes suggested wisdom and knowledge. They stared steadily at the boy. The boy told the Sphinx he was prepared to answer its questions so he could continue to help the old man. The Sphinx nodded solemnly and took a moment as if preparing the trial. Then, to the boy's astonishment, a desk and paper appeared and the Sphinx assumed a showman's air, suddenly dressed in a black suit with a polka-dotted tie and a bowler hat. The Sphinx declared the challenge in the tone of a game show host. Correct answers would allow passage and incorrect answers would bring severe consequences. Recorded applause and cheers echoed from speakers behind it. The boy, bewildered but determined, sat at the desk and picked up a pencil, finding a multiple-choice worksheet with 4 boxes to fill. The first question asked when World War I had ended. The boy answered that it had ended on November 11, 1918, and applause rang out. The Sphinx reminded him to write answers on the paper and wait for the choices to be announced. The next question asked the capital of Ireland, and the boy wrote down Dublin after a brief exchange with the Sphinx about procedure. Then the boy interrupted, asking what had happened to the old riddle about man, the one about walking on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening. The Sphinx raised an elegant eyebrow, listening as the boy recalled the riddle about the stages of human life, crawling as a baby, walking on 2 legs as an adult, and using a cane in old age. The Sphinx reminded him that that was the riddle sphinxes used to ask in the past. The Sphinx explained that most people already knew the answer, so they had agreed to change the questions to fit the times. The boy asked who they meant. The Sphinx gestured impatiently and identified itself as part of the Association of Sphinxes Secrecy, explaining that most heroes seemed to know the riddle like the back of their hands, so they had made it harder to answer. The boy, not really understanding and not particularly wanting to, picked up his pencil and answered the questions. The Sphinx continued asking, and the boy continued providing the correct answers. After 10 minutes and 20 questions in all, the Sphinx checked how he had done. The Sphinx noted that his answers were nicely filled in. The machine indicated the final result, a drum roll sounded, and the boy found himself anticipating the outcome. The Sphinx announced that all answers were correct and declared a winner. The empty planes filled with the sound of pre-recorded applause. The Sphinx, still clad in the host outfit, beamed and stepped aside to let the boy move on. Seeing the expectant look, the boy walked forward slowly and hesitantly. Normally this would have been the moment an ambush occurred, but to his relief he remained safe. After 5 minutes of travel, he finally found the temple the old man had described. It was a straightforward Greek-style temple, reasonable for an island off the coast of the mainland, with pillars guarding its entrance. Inside, the steps rose toward the center, where a single platform held something under a glass dome. By then he was on edge, expecting danger. He was surprised when there were no monsters, no cultists, and no magic traps. On the waist-high podium lay a single dagger beneath the dome. Maybe this would be easier than he had feared. The dagger looked wrong. Its surface shimmered with iridescent colors, and the blade bent twice in opposing curves before straightening toward the tip. Greek inscriptions ran where the handle met the blade. The handle itself was elegant, with red and gold accents woven into the guard. The edge and tip appeared blunt and the material seemed brittle, yet there was an odd aura about it as if it carried echoes of blood and betrayal. Despite his misgivings, he reached out and took the dagger by the handle. Almost immediately, roars filled the temple as the enchantment that had bound the creatures broke. He cursed that it had been too much to expect nothing to happen, summoned a gauntlet on his left arm, and drew a knife from his waist. Trapdoors in the floor opened and creatures poured into the room. Most of the creatures looked human in form but had unsettling hybrid features. Their animal traits made them eerie rather than attractive. Others were clearly otherworldly, satyrs armed with knives, hellhounds, and a massive minotaur wielding a huge battle-axe. A bead of sweat ran down his cheek as the courtyard filled with hostile figures eager to attack. The standoff tightened until the minotaur, impatient, roared and charged. That charge signaled the onslaught, and the horde surged forward. The minotaur reached him first. When the beast swung its axe, he dodged. The weapon sank into the hard floor. Using the haft as a springboard, he vaulted up the towering creature and struck decisively. The minotaur shuddered, collapsed, and dissolved into fine golden sand, leaving only a horn behind. One down, many more to go, he thought, and then moved through the crowd. He fought swiftly and efficiently, his movements precise in the hectic melee. The encounter played out like an intense, fast-paced action sequence. Creatures toppled and dissolved without graphic detail, and the room echoed with the clash of steel and the hiss of vanishing magic. Hours later, he stood alone in the temple. Dust covered the floor. He checked that the dagger was secured in his pocket and turned to leave, but his foot struck something. It was the minotaur's horn. He picked it up and studied it. It curved wickedly and was longer than he expected, nearly a foot from base to tip, sharp enough to prick him if handled carelessly. He pocketed it and set off to find the old man. When he found the old man, the elder sat on the ground with his back against the lone tree on the cliff, gazing out over the ocean. The old man rose as the boy approached, relief and gratitude showing in his expression. Tears shimmered at the corners of his eyes. The old man told the boy that he had come back and repeated that he had actually returned, his voice trembling with relief. The boy replied that he had. The old man asked why. It sounded genuinely confused, as if he had not expected anyone to answer his plea. The boy answered with a question of his own. Why not? The old man fell silent for a moment, then began to tell his story. He had once been a respected sage, known for his knowledge of the supernatural. Then tragedy struck. His wife and 3 children had been murdered by a mage who used their deaths to power forbidden blood magic. Grief and rage drove the sage to confront the mage in his workshop. After a brutal duel that lasted 7 days and nights, the sage had been defeated but escaped through a last-minute magical barrier. Shamed and unable to avenge his family, the sage turned to a desperate hope, rumors of a powerful sealed artifact. He traveled for months and eventually found what he sought: a jinn. Jinn were among the most formidable beings in the mortal realm, entities of smoke and fire capable of granting contractors' wishes at a steep cost. The sage, consumed by anger and the euphoria of finding the jinn, asked it for the power to kill the mage. He signed the contract and was granted the strength he sought. Elated, he returned home and tore through the mage's workshop. With a contemptuous wave, he shattered the barriers around it and repelled the mage's defenses. He struck down the mage, exacting retribution for the suffering the man had inflicted. When it was over and the contract was fulfilled, the jinn appeared before him. The jinn stripped the sage of his powers, taking not only the power granted by their pact but also the power the man had once possessed. Before the helpless man's eyes, the jinn moved to the fallen members of his family, placed his hands over their heads, and drew their spirits away in a swirl of smoke and light. The jinn told the sage that he had done his part in the bargain and that now the sage must do his. The man could do nothing but watch as the figures of his family were gathered into that smoke and vanished. He begged and pleaded, but the jinn remained adamant and would not release them. The rest of his life the man spent searching for the jinn he had unwittingly unleashed upon his land and its people. Now weak and powerless, he pleaded with the boy to help restore both his family and the land. He explained the dagger the boy carried, described the powers contained within it, and said that the dagger had a name. Its name was... Motohoma whispered Sakura's name to the 2 people beside him. Issei watched the scene with a mixture of nerves and anticipation, cramped in the small space between his friends. The 3 of them hid together in a locker in the first-year changing room, a risky choice made to settle a debt and to try to make amends. Earlier that day, Issei had been walking back to his room with Asia and Rias. The return through the school gates had been chaotic, with students shouting accusations and outrage directed at Rias. Issei had shrugged it off and stepped into his room, only to be met with a sudden, precise kick from Rias that knocked him to the ground and sent his bag skittering away. Asia immediately rushed to check on him, concerned and asking if he was hurt. Matsuda glared down at Issei, bewildered and angry about something Issei had done. Motohoma moved to calm Matsuda, insisting that whatever happened would be turned into an opportunity for a final laugh. Issei realized then that he had set Matsuda and Motohoma up with someone named Miltan and his friends, and those dates had gone poorly. When Issei asked how it went, Matsuda explained that it had been a disaster. Motohoma added that they had arranged something to get back at him, offering him a front-row seat to a surprising event in the first-year wing. Issei eagerly agreed, not fully understanding the consequences, while Asia continued to fuss over his scraped pride. Back in the present, Issei tried to whisper an excited observation to his companions about what he thought he had seen, but his words were cut short as more students began to enter. The 3 had a reputation as pranksters, and their behavior now was part of that pattern rather than anything proper. A popular first-year student with white hair and hazel eyes entered and, noticing the locker, fixed them with a sharp glare that made Issei uneasy. Before anyone could react further, a sudden force struck the metal door. It tore from its hinges and sent the room into chaos. Matsuda and Motohoma fainted from the shock, and Issei went pale as he became the center of attention. He tried to make a nervous joke asking if they came here often, but the other students were not amused. Rule breaker. Issei raised his arm above his head and stared at the object he held. He had gone to the rooftop after a disastrously impulsive attempt to peek at something, and he needed to think about what this relic meant for him and for his life as a devil. Rule breaker was, simply put, the most effective anti-magic weapon in the world. Most magic, except for a few rare and truly powerful exceptions, failed when faced with its blade. It could cut spells, cancel runes, and in many cases sever even contracts. He knew this because the weapon had worked against souls bound by a djinn and had dissolved that bond. He let himself imagine the implications. The dragon inside him admitted that it had actually forgotten about one detail. Issei raised an imaginary eyebrow and asked the dragon if it was really true. The dragon explained that when a host's life was as hectic as Issei's, one tended to forget things. Issei chuckled and let the silence settle between them for a few moments. Then the dragon grew serious and asked whether Issei planned to use Rule Breaker on himself. Issei admitted that he did not really know. The dragon reminded him that Issei was the sort to plan most things, and Issei replied that he would not be alive if he did not plan. After a brief silence, Issei sheathed Rule Breaker and hid it in a pouch, telling himself that he still needed to go to class. After school, Issei had a conversation with Asia in the classroom before heading to the clubroom. He asked Asia how she was doing in her classes, concerned about his surrogate little sister's performance. Asia said that she was doing fine and that many classmates were willing to help her improve. They had even invited her to go to the mall later, and her eyes shone with excitement. Issei sighed and admitted he had never been good at studying, mostly because he had never cared much for it. Asia fidgeted and asked whether she should go with them. Issei reassured her that she should. High school was the springtime of youth and the club president and Akino were not in, so she would not be missing anything important. He offered to take care of her contracts while she went. Asia began to ask something else, but Issei gently pushed her toward the group of girls waiting for her, and she blushed before running off toward Kiryu Aika, a bespectacled girl with brown hair in 2 braids. With a final wave to Asia, Issei left for the clubroom. When he arrived at the clubroom, he found only Kaneko eating sweets. Her glare made it clear she had not forgiven him for what had happened earlier. Issei asked where Kibo was. Kaneko tersely replied that Kibo was with his friends. An awkward silence fell between them until Kaneko suddenly thanked Issei for his lessons. Issei was a little surprised by her show of appreciation and replied that helping a junior was no problem. He called her his cute junior, and she showed a rare sign of embarrassment. Gathering her resolve, Kaneko asked Issei to teach her how to fight like he did. Issei raised an eyebrow and asked why she wanted that. Kaneko explained that during the match she had felt she had not contributed enough. She listed the others: Issei, Kiba, Akino, the club president, and even Asia, and said that they had all been better than she had been in the game. She looked down with her fist clenched. Issei's expression softened. He reached out and patted her on the head, reassuring her that she had been an important part of the club president's plan and that she had accomplished what she needed to. He reminded her that she had managed to take out many of Riser's pieces and told her she should not think so poorly of herself. Kaneko's wide-eyed surprise showed how much the reassurance meant to her. Issei agreed to teach her, saying that it was a senior's job to help juniors, and Kaneko nodded. Issei was in a predicament. He had told Kaneko he would help, but he did not really know how. When he said he was a beginner in senjutsu, he had meant it. He only knew the bare basics of chakra. Still, he had promised to help, and he intended to keep that promise. His fighting style was hard to teach, learned from hundreds of life-and-death battles that forced him to move on instinct. Kaneko arrived on time behind him and asked why they needed to train in the forest clearing. Issei explained that learning to fight required space and privacy, and that the clearing outside Kuo Town was far enough that unaware humans would not notice. Kaneko hugged her arms to her chest and glared, asking what he planned to do. Issei hurriedly clarified that he meant they might use magic and it was better for ordinary people not to notice. Kaneko relaxed and asked what they would actually do. Issei told her to meditate while he thought things over. She sat cross-legged and closed her eyes to regulate her internal energy, and Issei sat at the edge of the clearing with his back to a tree. He considered what to teach and remembered a martial arts style he had once seen in Vietnam that emphasized footwork and using an opponent's momentum. It combined grapples and locks with well-timed strikes, pragmatic and effective rather than showy. He decided that teaching that footwork would let Kaneko use her small frame to her advantage. But first he needed to teach the basics, footwork. Issei beckoned Kaneko over. She opened her eyes and followed, then looked surprised and embarrassed when Issei guided her into a basic dance hold, placing a hand at her waist and taking her hand in a standard dancing position. Kaneko asked uncertainly, blushing. Issei reminded her that she had asked to be taught and explained that dancing would teach her how to move her feet properly. He indicated their feet and began to lead, moving with a steady step and a quiet hum so she could match his tempo. Kaneko hesitated at first but grew confident as she adapted to the rhythm. Her steps became surer and lighter. Alone in the clearing, they moved together as if dancing to a tune only they could hear. Gradually Issei slowed until they stopped where they had begun. Kaneko tried to hide her disappointment. Issei stepped away and instructed her to repeat the steps on her own, to put strength into them and practice what they had done for the past hour. Kaneko glanced at her wrist and was surprised to find an hour and a half had passed. She followed his instruction and performed the footwork again, moving gracefully as if facing an imaginary opponent. She twirled and practiced kicks and turns, fully immersed in the rhythm. She spun and caught Issei's arm inches from her face, gripping his fist and bicep in a practiced hold. Issei gently freed his arm and praised her, telling her she had done well. Kaneko thanked him, and Issei reminded her that it was his duty as her senior to help her reach her potential, striking a playful pose. He encouraged her to keep practicing until the movements became instinctive. Kaneko asked meekly if he would teach her again, and Issei agreed. Her smile made him feel unexpectedly flustered. Issei grinned, clutching the bag to his chest as he walked back to his house. Adult Paradise 8 had been released 3 days earlier. He had meant to buy it sooner, but he had been busy taking care of Kaneko, so it had slipped his mind. Now he was home alone, planning to enjoy a quiet afternoon. The parents had gone to Hokkaido to visit a sick relative. Asia had gone out with her new friends, and Rias had returned to the underworld to discuss family politics. It was the perfect day, and nothing could ruin it. A massive spike of aura laced with malice rose from the direction of the forest, an energy he knew all too well. Just as he recognized it, the presence suddenly plummeted, almost vanishing from his senses. Fear tightened around his chest. There were only 2 reasons aura would disappear that quickly, and neither was good. Issei called for Kaneko. He dropped the bag, summoned his gauntlets, and ran as fast as he could toward her location.